Yo, what's a good shinobi nation? Welcome back to Just a Shinobi, the home of the craziest Naruto What Ifs. Today we're jumping into part 7 of What If Naruto was trapped in a time loop. So strap in, because things are about to get explosive. If you're new to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share this video with your whole ninja squad. And of course, drop your theories in the comments. Your support is what keeps this shinobi grinding. I think I made a mistake. This is not about closing out a story. That will happen on its own. The labor I am to perform here is to have fun, and to bring you all there to share it with me. Anything else is a waste. Actually, having taken a brief break, I find I'm all afire with fresh ideas again. Besides, rushing this to completion is only possible if I neglect to spend any screen time developing the side characters I am only now introducing, and that, I think, would be an error. So Kin walked into the no longer secret underground lab, calling, "I know why we wanted Haku, who, as it turns out, is a girl. But why were you so interested in bringing back Zabuza's corpse?" Zabuza, reanimated by the impure resurrection technique, followed in after carrying the coffin that contained his original body. Haku's was already in the corner of the secret lab where the gene stealing was going to be done. Another project of Rochi-chan's, Anko shrugged, looking up from her work doing so. I figured Hinata had such success with hers, and she did help out the clan greatly, that I could do the same, bring one of my old teacher's discarded projects to life and make it into something that could help us all out in the future, and perhaps earn my medical badge in the bargain. Kin blinked. I thought you couldn't recall those years. Anko grimaced. I was no longer able to put up with wondering about my past. I needed answers, so I had to delve into my memories to open up the blocks that were put in there over the period of my apprenticeship to Rochi-chan. Frankly, though they seemed bad at the time, it was worse not knowing what it was I'd been up to as his student. So, what project are you working on? Kin leaned closer to look. One of the many routes the traitor Sannin pursued trying to find a path to immortality, Anko answered. There weren't many who'd succeeded at this before him, so he had more theories than facts about what to pursue. So, as usual with him, he devoted effort into them all before he found a route that promised success, then abandoned all others. Kin resumed blinking. So, you've found a secret to eternal youth? No, not actually. The special grinned up at the former sound ninja. That was never much of a part of his quest. Rochi-chan was always more interested in the how do I live through the destruction of my body type of living forever, since he's always been a bit reckless in combat. Besides, we already have the eternal youth part covered through our decorations. Kin was nodding. Yeah, once I understood the situation, I have to admit that I pretty much expected the QB decorations to include a component like that. After all, she doesn't want Naruto to die on her, so it only makes sense that her revisions to his body would have some way to keep it in optimal condition indefinitely. Since she seems to be playing straight with her actions for now, all us female clan members got the same enhancements, so our bodies will end up in optimal condition indefinitely as well. Which, the young Kunoichi smoothed down the shirt against her young and trim sides, I have to admit is not the least of my joys over being a part of this clan. Anko snorted. You ought to have seen the rest of us when we figured that out. We took the opportunity to get QB another rather extended grooming session with Naruto strictly as a personal thank you gift from our side. I know that Naruto never minds doing that for one of his ladies. Kin gave a happy bounce. I can't say I'd mind more myself, but she fluffed out her hair, as I am not personally responsible for seeing to it that our clan will probably outlive Konoha. Yeah. I'd say she deserved it. Anko spent a moment in sober thought over that. There'd always been ninja organizations, but they got destroyed or remade at fairly even intervals, historically speaking, and nobody stayed on top for long. Konoha was actually coming to the end of the historical average for anyone holding the top dog position, and the expected rot and corruption of an aged champion on its way out had already set in, with council members and clans more concerned about petty self-interests than in preserving the village. It was a thought that bore thinking on. Nothing was more certain in history than people getting overrun the moment they're sure they couldn't be. The moment you thought you were so strong that you couldn't be defeated, you got beaten by somebody. It occurred so often in history that it was like some cosmic joke, or something. Now the idea of outliving Konoha had occurred to her. Anko had to admit that not only did she like the idea, but they, as a clan, ought to investigate going into some serious efforts to ensure that. Because Konoha was nearing the end of its expected lifespan, their clan was only just starting out. So, what are you making? Can I help? Kin leaned over to ask. Anko shook herself out of such thoughts. Sure. I could use a fresh mind on this problem. You already know of our projects looking into the various types of elemental clones. Well, Orochimaru had already found out the secrets of most of those, and he'd had a brilliant intuitive leap. He thought of creating a clone, not out of chakra elements, but out of medical means. Huh! Kin was lost on that little turnabout. Anko smiled back at her. A clone made out of flesh and blood, grown instead of summoned. Not a chakra construct, but an actual living body created via advanced medical techniques, as real as the one you were born with. It was his hope to hop from body to body, and at first he thought to use his own. The Sound Maiden was now blinking in amazement. Wow! So how far did he get with that? The dark-haired special went back to scowling over her sparse work notes. Creating flesh clones? Nowhere, unfortunately. He'd sobered up in the morning and forgot about the whole deal. I'm having to start on this from scratch. But before he passed out from too much liquor, he'd speculated that this could turn our impure resurrection technique into a pure one because the spirit would have a copy of its own living body to inhabit. Anko shrugged. It's the same line of thought that eventually led him to what he's doing now, a spirit that jumps from body to body as the old ones get damaged beyond the reasonable ability to repair. With this, he was going to use multiple younger and whole copies of his own body. But he ended up using other people's, because of the added bonus of throwing their bloodlines and special powers onto the heap with his. And Zabuza is going to be your experimental model for this. Kin blinked in shock, then called out back over her shoulder. You hear that, demon boy? Anko here is working on a way to drag your sorry spirit out of hell. So you could be immortal again. The body animated by the legendary swordsman's spirit was suddenly kneeling before Anko in a position of utmost humility. Redeem my soul from hell, and I shall be your devoted servant. I shall live as Haku did, to be redeemed from my countless crimes. Anko looked up at Kin and smirked. Well, that's promising. The Kitsun clan compound was, as always, awash in activity. There were clones everywhere performing techniques, practicing skills, and generally busy with the everyday activities of ninja life. Over in one of the massive courtyards, a group of clones were listening to the impure resurrected form of the first Hokage teach them about his bloodline powers, getting tutoring in his gift and asking questions on techniques. Over in another courtyard, the impure resurrected form of the second Hokage was teaching people what he could of his impressive water abilities, while Shizen evaluated whether that was a bloodline gift they could copy. They hoped it was, and things were looking promising. Lately a new crowd had formed, and the fourth Hokage's animated body was doing some tutoring of his own. The reason for this was very simple. Naruto was his son, and the pattern he once used to get that fact revealed to the village was no longer something they could duplicate. It had required Kurenai's unwitting assistance back before she joined in the resets, and so it was not a pattern she recalled or could duplicate. She hadn't even lived through it before being awakened, and that made replicating that pattern precisely monstrously difficult. Sarutobi, the third Hokage, was a shrewd judge of character, and Naruto was the only one they knew who could act convincingly enough to fool the old guy. Kurenai could, and had, tried going through the motions as Naruto told her the lines she'd once used, but the results had not convinced the old guy. This despite months spent in practice, getting coached by Naruto and refining it all in active practice during live attempts to convince their Hokage. It was a very exacting set of cues and leads that eventually got the current village leader to let slip who Kakashi's former teacher was. Naruto was adroit enough to duplicate things to that level of exactness, but no one else was, and a big part of that conversation depended on Kurenai. Without Sarutobi dropping that little hint, the pattern they knew for getting that information released to the village at large didn't work. If Naruto told anybody, the Hokage let the village council discipline him for spreading false rumors. And if anybody else said a word, they got executed. It was a secret their current Hokage was willing to kill for. Apparently he was that certain it was needed for keeping Naruto safe from his father's foes. Who knew? He could even be right. The clan didn't exactly have any long-range predictive ability for repercussions to events outside of the resets. But the point was, they didn't care. Their Naruto was not some ignorant genin or dead last, like the Hokage felt he was. The resets had refined him to the point that if the secret could ever be revealed, it was safe to do so now. And really, surrendering happiness and freedom in exchange for safety was generally a poor choice in any case, as things never turned out how you wanted them to. Preserving a life, only to make that life not worth living, was not any sort of gain or accomplishment. The Uchiha had enemies as well, yet no one shoved Sasuke so far down into a disguise that he'd been hated and warped by abuse and misery. Although Sasuke was a bad example, he'd chosen to delve into misery on his own. A classic case of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The last Uchiha had all of the tools for a happy life, admiration of others and kindness, but he'd chosen not to permit himself happiness. However, he'd made that choice himself. No one had done it to him. Still, they needed another plan for how to reveal to the village that Naruto was the son of their most beloved Hokage. Until they could do that, the hate and unreasoning anger the village felt against him would not abate, and that meant no promotion for the lad. Ironically, they were now in almost the reverse position of the one they'd had before. For a great many resets, Naruto had a system where he could get the village to like him enough to allow his promotion, but couldn't deal effectively with the invasion or Orochimaru. Now they knew a dirty trick whereby they could reliably kill the stinking pedophile, using his own arrogance against him, but the route that once worked to achieve the appreciation of the village so he could get a promotion was no longer valid. Strange are the twists of fate. One of their preferred notions was to get Naruto acting close enough to the fourth for the resemblance to take hold in and of itself, and create some spark they could then expand on. That included acting and dressing like his dad, but it also had to extend to fighting like his dad, and that meant Naruto had to learn his father's techniques. Spiraling sphere was simple. Jiraiya was so easy to get addicted to the sexy paradise illusion that any time they wanted to they could effectively reduce the Toad Sannin to Naruto's slave. Since the super pervert knew how to use the fourth's legendary attack, he could teach it to the clan no problem. The problem came in the other half of the Yellow Flash's unbeatable combo, the speed technique that enabled him to slaughter 1,000 rock ninja with his unbeatable attack. The Flying Thunder God technique that gave the Yellow Flash his name was not available on any scroll they knew of, nor did the Toad Sannin know how to use it. The one time Sarutobi tried to pass on Naruto's inheritance, it had been discovered that the scrolls that had once been supposed to be part of it had been stolen long ago. That no one had been heard of using the fourth Hokage's technique said that whatever security seals or codes had been on the scrolls themselves had probably worked, perhaps even destroyed them, sealing the secrets of those techniques forever. So, for all anyone could tell, that secret had died with the fourth Hokage. So they brought him back to make him teach them. It seemed pretty simple and straightforward to the members of Clan Kitsune. If only the fourth knew it, and only the fourth could teach it, then he would teach them. In spite of being dead. There was a lesson to be learned there. In fact, it opened wide possibilities that even Naruto's new family were not sure they were quite willing to take. The possibility was that no technique could truly be lost so long as they knew of a dead guy who'd once used it. Thankfully, availability of bodies was somewhat limited, otherwise they could use this to learn every technique ever practiced in the ninja world. As it was, however, ninja routinely destroyed the bodies of their fallen comrades lest the secrets of their village be unlocked by enemies studying their corpses. Even with the rare exceptions, there weren't all that many bodies to find. Thankfully, they had a few. "You know I worry about him," Hana told Shizen, watching Naruto practice under the tutelage of the animated fourth Hokage. "That's his father out there, and—" The Inuzuka heiress sighed. The slug Sannin's apprentice shook her head softly. "No, not really. It isn't the same. The impure resurrection technique gives us only a narrow window into what the man truly was. It's more like a puppet influenced by a dead man than a living, breathing person. Something's there, but it isn't the same." Hana folded her arms, still looking at the scene. "But still, it isn't good for a boy, an orphan at that, to have so little reaction to his father like that." The more experienced medic drew in a deep breath, then let it out again. "I'd say you're right, but we have a few factors complicating things. On the one hand, Naruto ought to be furious. His father left him with nothing, no family, no house, no money, no one to care for him. None of what truly matters to a young child, or what they need growing up, did his father provide. Naruto was left in the harshest of all possible environments to develop in, and it has stunted him still. There's all sorts of things our husband is still overcoming, left as relics of that extremely harsh and lonely childhood. Hana scowled herself. The family was packed, and you didn't turn your back on it. A failure to uphold one's pack was unforgivable, the most serious failure anyone could ever perform, worse than murder and worse than treason. There are a number of people who are responsible for that, she growled. Shizen nodded sadly. Yes, Sarutobi is a big one. He was responsible for the secret of the Kyuubi getting out, which led to all of the hatred. He tried to put a lid on it with that law of his, but it didn't do anything useful. That cat was already out of the bag. The village blamed Naruto for the loss of their beloved fourth Hokage, the damage caused by the Kyuubi, and just about everything else that went wrong at the time. Then Sarutobi is responsible for trying to keep Naruto's parentage a secret, which was just about the only thing that could have stopped all of that hatred from forming. So the situation as it exists was more or less authored by Sarutobi. Hana's grimace slipped, then she dropped her head. I could hate him for that, but I know he honestly thought he was doing best. Foolishness isn't the same as treason, in spite of the fact that it can do more harm, sometimes. Shizen's lips grew thin. The person I blame most is Jiraiya. He is Naruto's godfather, and the only purpose or reason for the existence of the role of godfather is to take over the role of father should the child's parents ever lose their ability to care for it. That's been the one job of godfather for the entirety of recorded history, stretching back thousands of years. 1. That Jiraiya ran away from his responsibilities, leaving Naruto with nothing instead of raising the boy himself, is nothing short of reprehensible. It is an utter and complete betrayal of trust, not only that he effectively left him to die, alone among a village full of enemies, but that when Jiraiya came back he refused to give Naruto any training without being bribed for it. Legally, he is the closest thing to a father Naruto has, and you shouldn't have to parade a naked body in front of your father to get him to teach you anything. So we held him, Hana stated. At least, Shizen answered seriously. Even if you want to grant that he could not take care of a kid himself, which is not true, as he spent most of his time lazing around and partying instead of in any real danger, then he still had responsibility for arranging Naruto's care, and he didn't even bother to do that. It's no wonder, in light of all he's learned, that Naruto has trust issues with authority figures after discovering things like that. He's never truly had an authority figure who was deserving of trust. Even Sarutobi could have done more than go out with him for ramen once a month, no matter what disguise or appearance he wanted to be maintaining. A leader is allowed to take note when an orphan is being abused, and do something about it. Hana growled in the back of her throat. Shizen formed a fist. And then we come back to Kakashi. The man was a student of Naruto's father, so had spent enough time with him he had no real excuse not to notice the resemblance. But even if you grant him that, say he had no interest in the boy before becoming his teacher, he darn well should have suspected something after being named Naruto's instructor. The name Uzumaki was only ever held by one other person in this village, and he'd been close enough to the fourth to know who he was dating. Kakashi shows a criminal disinterest in his student to have not figured out Naruto was the son of his own teacher. Anyone with any situational awareness at all could have figured that one out. He wouldn't even have had to look too deeply. His own life experiences should have provided all of the evidence that he needed, and Kakashi spends all of his time musing on his past. The apprentice to the slug Sannin visibly tried to calm herself. Kakashi has no excuse for not knowing, if not originally, then later. And knowing, he had a responsibility to help out. As his father's friend and student, Kakashi was next in line for being the adult responsible for caring for Naruto throughout his life. Heck, he didn't even have to do that. All he'd have had to do was his job. If he'd been even a halfway decent teacher to Naruto, our husband would not have developed the trust issues he's facing now. And without that, he'd be able to enjoy the presence of his own father, even if it is in impure form. Hana looked over to her friend and sister via marriage. Hey, I'm going to go kill someone brutally. Want to come along? Sure. Shizen shot her back a grin, before they both disappeared. The bodies of Jiraiya and Kakashi would later be discovered, having been put to death in some of the most agonizing ways imaginable. Ironically, the assassination of a couple high-ranking Konoha ninja put that town on alert, and thus far more ready to counter the sand/sound invasion. Contrary to popular opinion, Dai and Lee did not spend every waking moment shouting about the power of youth. This is not to say they were sober, serious shinobi, but they did have their quiet moments when things had to pause and be considered. Then they could go back to the sport chants and ridiculous physical training levels. One of those quiet moments was occurring right now, at the Kitsune clan compound, after the two had been led through on a very loud, guided tour of the facilities where the two fitness nuts had seen the chakra training, the sparring, people practicing Zabuza's sword techniques and receiving tutoring from the various Hokages. Guy and Lee had immediately noted, and complained about, the lack of extreme physical fitness training, but even that had been explained. They'd even seen the forges where Zabuza's animated self had been guiding Naruto into somewhat more accurate copies of his gigantic sword. The trio of Naruto, Guy, and Lee had paused in the forges where Naruto had intended to outfit the pair of new recruits with armor. But they'd run into some immediate snags there, as well. No! Guy crushed an armored breastplate in his fist and tossed it away. I cannot wear something so unyouthful. I would tear it apart like a set of pajamas the moment I got going. The pajama thing is actually kind of the point. Naruto tilted his head. It had to be lightweight and flexible enough for us to wear it. Indeed, Naruto's original armor designs would have been both heavier and stronger, save for the fact that those who wore it could not bear very much weight. So sacrifices had to be made in order to preserve mobility and maximize flexibility. It turned out Guy and Lee wanted much heavier armor, increased protection mostly, but they weren't afraid of heaviness, considering they played with weights that would flatten most. To demonstrate his teacher's point, Lee took hold on one of those armored plates and tore it like tissue paper. So Naruto designed a much heavier style of armor. He kept the articulation, so one could still move and stay flexible within it, provided greatly increased weight couldn't slow you down, which, for anyone but Guy and Lee, it would. But the strength monsters could bound around like butterflies in it, and if they were slowed at all, only they could tell. But the protection of the new sets was so much superior that soon everyone wanted one, planning to get strong enough to use them later, after the loops had ended. But then Guy suggested reverse weight seals. Instead of making an object heavier to train under, it made it lighter, so even the gentlest and slenderest of Naruto's wives could use the much heavier armor styles right away, rather than later. And so they did, and in the process gained a degree of protection that would have impressed anyone. The old sets, the extremely lightweight ones, could have been penetrated by a good blow by a strong arm. The new ones? Forget it. If it wasn't an optimized armor-piercing weapon, it stood no chance. Unless you were facing a close combat specialist, Zabuza, Guy, and Lee representing the extreme case of such individuals, the new armor could effectively ignore most purely physical attacks. And that was just the way they liked it. Of course, that still left them vulnerable to chakra or elemental techniques, illusions, tricks, traps, and so on. Explosive notes could crush you despite your armor. And then, of course, there were giant summon monsters who could squash armored ninja like ants. So they were still far from safe. But they were much, much closer. There were inevitable weak points, of course. A long, furry tail is almost impossible to armor properly, as are parabolic ears. Because of them, there were places where a canny attacker could make a telling strike even without great strength or specialty weapons. But no one has ever died from getting a bit shaved off one ear. Well, there was Van Gogh, but painters don't count. In spite of Naruto's family all knowing how to paint. After much labor in the workshop getting the new armor heavy and strong enough to meet the pair's approval, Naruto led the duo out to have lunch. A picnic was already laid out for the entire clan on blankets, where they all had an excellent view of the new Hokage monument. It had been carved up, replacing the former faces with Guy and Lee in their nice guy poses, teeth somehow glinting and thumbs up, with a banner carved beneath them reading, "Welcome Guy and Lee." Yugao stood before an audience consisting of Clan Kitsune, plus Kiba, Guy, Lee and Sakura, and strode before the large war maps hanging behind her. She was in the midst of a lecture on their spy situation. Konoha has never been very good at information gathering. Our position as the strongest village has led to some degree of arrogance. Even some feel it hardly matters what the other villages are up to. That's a mistake. It leads to unpleasant surprises, things like this sand/sound invasion. She used a swagger stick to point, indicating the position of the attacking forces, as they'd be when it came time for the invasion. Then she snorted. Besides, information gathering missions aren't glamorous. A good one is actually quite boring, so adrenaline junkies sneer at them. But they also don't pay anything, as the client is Konoha itself. Much more profitable in the short term to use our ninja on paying missions. But it costs us in the long run. Yugao took a deep sigh and shook her head sadly. Also, deep cover is where the real gold mines of information are, and we are too tender-hearted to do that to many of our kunoichi. I can't say I mind that policy, as it's pretty callous to throw away your ninjas' lives on missions like that, where even if they succeed their lives are ruined and they're gone forever, but it does cost us in the intelligence department. The sword's mistress, and Anbiu parked her swagger stick on her shoulder. Sand is far more ruthless than we are, and has a much better intelligence setup. When Daimyo demanded they reduce their ninja forces, sending those missions he wanted done off to Konoha, the Kazekage selected only the weakest shinobi to be eliminated, and took them off the rolls of active duty by condemning them to deep cover assignments. It paid off. Although quite a number of those agents have been killed or captured over the years, they still have some of the best information sources out there among any of the 5 major villages. Konoha has relied on our allies' intelligence network for years to supplement our own rather weak one. Heck, if it wasn't for Jiraiya running his own independent setup, or information passed on to us by Sand, Konoha wouldn't have anything worth calling a spy network. It's there, we couldn't call ourselves a ninja village if we didn't make any rudimentary efforts, but not good enough to stop us from being blindsided by events. And an invasion is a pretty major event to have not seen at all. Yugao used her swagger stick to wave toward a second board, this one covered by pictures of Kabuto and other traders. Of course, as can be observed by how deeply Orochimaru has penetrated us, we can be said to suck even worse on counter-espionage. The secrets of Konoha aren't very secret to the other ninja villages, who have a disturbingly accurate picture of the major events that go on in our home. That information makes their ninjas stand out less when they visit us, and that in turn makes us easier for them to infiltrate. It's a steady cycle. The more they know about us, the better their penetration efforts go, and the more they can know about us. To be frank, we've got more undercover work going on here than most brothels. And all of it is targeted against the integrity of this village. The turned back to face her audience and sighed, holding both ends of her swagger stick and bending it slightly. Even should we eliminate our entire current crop of spies and enemy infiltrators, Konoha would not be secure. Too many villages have too complete and too recent ideas about our activities. They would be able to infiltrate us again. Of course, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but you must understand that even as thorough a housecleaning as the resets offer us isn't going to be enough on its own. We must also figure out a way to stop the flow of new spies coming in to replace the ones we eliminate. Yugao walked to her podium and set down the swagger stick. That concludes this briefing. Any questions? Hinata raised her hand. On being called on, she stood up, shining with brilliant trust in their mutual husband. Konoha is only a village, and Naruto already knows most of the people in it by sight. Why don't we have him memorize the faces of everyone else? That way, when strangers arrive, we'd be better able to identify them. Hana stood up. We rely on Naruto to do too much for us already. You've got a good plan, but we can handle at least part of the load ourselves. Most of us know a sizable portion of this village now. I'd bet even Temari knows more of Konoha's citizens than she does of Suna's by this point. Also, Enko put a measure forth to have unpredictable actions as part of every other reset. What I now propose is that we take advantage of this opportunity to combine the two. Every reset, we should have some games of hunt and seek, where we select names at random from the civilian roster, pretend they are enemy shinobi, study them as if they were targets and go find them. Each one of us can pursue her own, or we can do them together. It won't take us but a few years to have a good general familiarity with everyone. Enko also stood. This is based on my idea, so I ought to add, we should make sure that each and every one of us knows all Konoha ninja by sight and abilities. Essentially, you should all have a complete mental set of Nin-info cards on your fellow shinobi. What we don't know can and has hurt us before, and knowing who could be relied on for what makes us more flexible. Also, when Naruto gets to be Hokage, it could be a big help to him to know all of the shinobi under his command, Ino agreed, showing only slightly less brilliant trust in their mutual husband than Hinata. It was still early morning, and the last Uchiha was sleeping like a log, utterly and completely oblivious to any danger, safe in the apartment he had moved into after he'd sold the Uchiha clan compound to the village in a deal with the Hokage. Sasuke slept heavily, so confident in his superior ninja skills that he never imagined anyone could possibly do him harm. That sort of arrogance gets people killed. Ino and Yugao appeared in his room, and the purple-haired Anbu leaned close to her comrade to whisper in her ear, while Ino was paralyzing and sedating the Uchiha. Okay, now will you tell me what we are up to? There isn't anyone to listen to. Ino grinned back at her. We're going to practice new techniques to get you your medical badge, like I promised. Yugao blinked down at the boy Ino had paralyzed. So why are we doing this with the Uchiha? Ino's grin was downright feral. What we're about to do is both immoral and unethical, and we wouldn't want to hurt anyone we might actually care about. That made Sasuke the perfect test subject. Cruelty to Uchihas is not cruelty at all. I'll send one of my clones to take all of his tests for him. And what is it we are testing? The lovely ANBU inquired. A method for manufacturing deep cover agents, Ino replied. It was his obsession with his older brother that gave me the idea. An obsessed mind is an unhealthy one, and an unhealthy mind is a weak one. We can theoretically use a brainwashing technique to suppress that weak mind and overlay it with a personality of our choosing, thus destroying Sasuke and turning him into a new person. Our overlay won't have any skills to speak of, but that's where the second part of this comes in. Yugao crossed her arms, staring derisively down at the test patient. I can't possibly imagine a use for him as deep cover. His face is too well known. And if he has no memories or techniques, how is he going to disguise himself? He won't. Ino returned eagerly. We'll do all of the disguising right here. I got this idea from our bloodline theft techniques. We simply take a genetic template and overwrite his own, just like we're doing with memories. His own genes will be completely altered into something else, and then we can explore new medical techniques for changing his appearance to match. The ANBU blinked. That's actually impressive. Better still, it destroys the Sharingan. And without that, nobody will ever think of Sasuke as important. Ino's face hardened. Frankly, that's what motivated me to try this in the first place. He's led too many girls along and walked over too many people's lives in this town. His mind is full of filth, and I hate him for having once tricked me into admiring him. Revenge against Sasuke aside, what do we hope to accomplish with this technique? Yugao leaned forward to ask. The blonde girl smirked wickedly. Manufacture of disposable deep cover agents, of course. That's the single worst duty for ninja to perform, other than the truly wicked stuff the Hokage doesn't accept as missions, like the assassination of innocents. Anyway, somebody has to do deep cover, so I was thinking why not make our enemies do it for us? We take someone like Sasuke here, whom none of us care whether he lives or dies, and transform him medically into a person other villages won't recognize as a ninja. But we leave subconscious commands underlying the surface personality to find out and relay the kind of information we want. The ANBU's face whitened. Actually, that's a scary concept. What if our enemies learn that technique and use it on one of us? I don't think that's possible. Not on any of us. Orochimaru already has the mental parts of this working with the hidden commands and so on. Taiyuya was just revealing that to us earlier. Konoha has a dozen or so citizens who didn't even know they were spying on us. But none of those were ninja. Too much mental energy makes a technique like this impossible. So civilians only. So not even Anko, who Orochimaru was able to work on for a long time, could have had this done to her. That's because none of us have exceptionally weak minds like Sasuke does. Yes, but what if he improves the techniques? Yugao raised an eyebrow. Ino shrugged, bouncing her yellow hair. It's something my family techniques can be used to test for. We just weren't looking, although you can be sure that's changed now. Anyway, she tossed her hair. We'll just have to create some defenses against this sort of thing. Brainwashing techniques already exist, and are used by lots of villages, so it's not like there is no danger. That part isn't even new. No, the only aspect of this that's different is that we'll be developing medical techniques for changing a person's outward appearance, instead of relying on disguises that can be seen through. I mean, if we do this right, then not even a Sharingan or Hyuga could see through the illusion of the new face. Because it won't be an illusion, it'll be real flesh. The Yamanaka girl smirked evilly. So it won't matter that the new person we make out of Sasuke won't have any skills, because we can turn him into any old random peasant. No one will expect him to have any skills. Just another wandering orphan seeking for a place to settle down. He can pitch manure and summon someplace. And if anyone tests him for ninja powers, they won't find any no matter how hard they interrogate him. Because he won't have any. Yugao was nodding, then grew serious. But what if we fail? Ino grinned happily. Then we'll still have had a chance to perform horrible medical experiments on Sasuke, which counts as a win in my books. Niji Hyuga woke up the morning of his first exam test, got ready and got dressed in his typical attire of medium-sleeve light gray jacket with the high collar and black knee-length shorts. The only spots of color were his blue ninja sandals and the Konoha headband he wore to cover the cursed seal on his forehead. All functional. His long, straight black hair grown out to about mid-back was his one concession to pride. So wrapped up was Niji in his contemplations of the upcoming tests that he did not note Hinata when she passed by him on his way out of the Hyuga compound to meet his team. For one thing, she hardly acted like his main branch cousin in the slightest, moving and holding herself with a level of confidence that her father couldn't match. The Hyuga clan head had too much of a chip on his shoulder to act that confident and sure of himself. For another, she wasn't dressed as he'd grown accustomed to Hinata being dressed, in a thick jacket and blue calf-length pants. No, for some strange reason she was wearing a medium-sleeve light gray jacket with high collar and black knee-length shorts. Although she'd retained her standard blue ninja sandals, her headband was worn around her forehead instead of around her neck. Her blue hair also grew long, to about her mid-back. So, preoccupied as he was, Niji didn't recognize her. Instead, the poor genin was busy bracing himself for the standard, expected reaction when he met his team, psyching himself up against the spandex-wearing duo with those ridiculous haircuts and oversized eyebrows, shouting about the power of youth, and in all other ways being annoying obstacles to his progress. Instead, the Hyuga prodigy came to a shocked halt as he spotted the green beast of Konoha and Lee, who was practically his clone. Both of them looked up at him from where they'd been waiting, hands in the pockets of their medium-sleeve light gray jacket with high collars. He couldn't help but notice the black knee-length shorts, blue ninja sandals, or that each had somehow, miraculously grown their hair out of those horrid bowl cuts into long, straight styles that reached about their mid-backs. Gone were the green spandex, orange leg warmers and wristbands, bowl cuts and everything that made the freak stand out so horribly. Even the stupid grins were missing, replaced by copies of his own blank, stoic expression. Startled for a moment, Niji calmed himself, the opinion he had of the duo dropping at this obvious prank on him. But he wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Hi, Niji!" Then Tenten trotted up, and gone were the Chinese silks or buns in her hair. Instead, for some strange reason she was wearing the same light gray jacket with high collar, black shorts, and hairstyle as everyone else. Correcting his battle stance, assumed in the shock of their meeting, Niji nodded to her stiffly and tried to pretend everything was normal. Remember, Guy turned a stiff and stoic gaze upon his students. Hard work is meaningless. Either you are fated to become, or you are not. Bow to the whims of fate, and accept its inevitability. It is pointless to fight against one's destiny, Lee nodded soberly, with an utterly straight face. Niji's hands were clenched into fists by the time their teacher body flickered away. Glowering at his teammates, but relieved their prank was over, Niji walked away in something of an angry huff, only to get practically run over by a pink-haired girl who, he noted, was wearing another set of copies of his clothes, and her pink hair was worn long, straight, and to her mid-back. Eye twitching, the Hyuga genius plodded on angrily to the test center, only to stop and stare as Kurenai's teammate crossed his path, and every member of it, from the sensei on down to Kiba's dog, were all wearing identical copies of his own signature attire. Funny, but he'd never noticed before how much Shino's coat and pants resembled his own. Veins were popping on Niji's forehead as they walked on, only for a call out of a ramen shop to distract his attention, causing him to notice the waitress and chef were also wearing medium-sleeve light gray jackets with high collar and black knee-length shorts, their hair worn long and straight, down to their mid-backs. The boys' eyebrows both started twitching as they began passing other teams from other villages, and one of those foreign ninja had the kunoichi on their team wearing practically an identical copy of his own attire. This went beyond a joke. He couldn't imagine how anyone could get a maiden of sound, who'd never been to Konoha before, wearing his clothes. The Hyuga prodigy activated his white eyes, but couldn't detect an illusion. Then he practically got run over by the team from Sand, and the girl made his outfit look so good he could almost forget about her two brothers, one with a puppet strapped over his back, wearing the same medium-sleeve light gray jacket with high collar and black knee-length shorts as the boy carrying it, and the other wearing a great big gourd over his medium-sleeve light gray jacket with high collar and black knee-length shorts. All of their hair was long, straight, and hanging down to their mid-backs. Niji was standing in the middle of the street, fists clenched and fuming, when Lee came up on his elbow and declared, in his own sober, straight-laced and dangerous monotone, "Come inside. We are not fated to miss this test. It is our destiny to be on time." Niji almost slugged him for that. The Hyuga prodigy stormed angrily in the front doors of the test center, and this time he noticed his cousin Hinata hanging out with her team, all of them wearing his outfits. It was only the third time he'd seen her that morning. Niji could have stopped and said something, but he got cut off by a tide of orange clones streaming past, all of them wearing medium-sleeve jackets with high collars and black knee-length shorts, blonde hair worn straight and down to their mid-backs. Only the jackets this time were orange. The orange clones met up with the pink-haired girl and a boy, the Uchiha prodigy, who was thankfully not dressed up as a Niji clone. Then that team all streamed inside rather quickly. But somehow in the press, Hinata's team had also vanished, and he missed his opportunity to confront her. They were guarding the door, and Niji noted with a small amount of wonder that someone had also gotten them wearing copies of his signature attire. Storming in past them, the boy rammed his way past other people dressed like him and shoved open the doors to the test area, where every single face turned up to look at him, and from the proctors on down, every single person was wearing copies of his clothes. The head examiner nodded to him. "It's good to see you in regulation attire. Now sit. Those of you who are destined to pass will pass. Those who are destined to fail will fail. Be still, and contemplate fate." The Hyuga prodigy's head was hurting as he sat, and looked out the window, only to fall down in shock on noticing the Hokage monument had been changed so every single face there was looking down at him over his own style of high collar, long hair, and headbands worn as if concealing cursed marks. "Niji Hyuga. Fail," the head examiner called, hands stuffed deeply into the pockets of the medium-sleeve, light gray jacket he was wearing over his black, knee-length shorts. "It is obviously not your fate to become. Take away his uniform." The shocked Hyuga was picked up off the floor by two proctors dressed in identical clothes to his, and carried away stunned amid mutters about how obviously he was weaker than his cousin, Hinata. Niji found himself standing outside the test center dressed in a ridiculous giant rubber purple chicken costume, wondering what happened. Wahahaha! Naruto was rolling around on the ground as they saw Niji wander off to go buy fruit from a vendor dressed in a medium-sleeve light gray jacket with a high collar and black knee-length shorts. He had half the town filled with shadow clones shape-shifted into people wearing Niji's regular outfits. "Okay, that was one of the more surreal things we've ever done," Temari admitted, hands in the pockets of her medium-sleeve light gray jacket. The long hair looked good on her, though. It really rounded out her appearance. "How did we pull it off with the proctors anyway? I missed that part of the meeting," Tayuya admitted with a blush. Ino snorted. "Only because you were kissing Naruto while the rest of us were going over it. Really, couldn't you spare us a clone?" "No, because all of her clones were making out with Naruto clones as well," Kin smirked, hands stuffed in the pockets of her own medium-sleeve light gray jacket. "Now girls," Kurinai admonished, coming up behind them to take her hands out of her own copy of Niji's typical jacket to put them on their shoulders. She looked oddly different with straight hair. She'd passed most of her clan membership tests. It was only right that she be allowed to celebrate. "I'm the reason we got most of the proctors involved in this," Anko smirked, leaning up against a wall wearing her own copy of Niji's standard attire, and her hair also looked oddly different, worn straight and down. "They're ninja, and used to obeying orders. So, you arranged to give them orders to dress and act a certain way, and they do." "Yes, but how did you get those orders passed?" "Simple." Ibiki walked up, wearing a medium-sleeve light gray jacket with a high collar and black knee-length shorts. "She brought me to the resets." Sakura jumped as Kakashi put his hand on her shoulder. "You're nervous," he told her bluntly, before he tried a reassuring smile. "Don't be. I'm sure you'll do fine in the exam." The pink-haired genin couldn't resist a snort of derision. "The exam? Ha! I could pass it blindfolded, and in my sleep, no thanks to you." The one-eyed dropped his attempts at being reassuring and looked at her more closely, assessing his student. Then he spied the gap between her and the Uchiha she was always hanging off of. Slyly, he shoved his headband up off his Sharingan eye for a moment, before replacing it, assured that this was indeed his little genin girl, and not an illusion or replacement. Sakura balled her fists at how often her teacher did that of late. Was she really so obsessed at the moment she's not trying to be an article of the Uchiha's clothing people have to suspect she's an imposter? Sakura, Kakashi began. I've noticed that you're not trying to attract Sasuke's attention this morning. You can tell me if something is wrong. Yes, apparently she was. Sakura only growled by way of reply. Her instructor blundered on, trying to be helpful in spite of his abysmal track record on relationships. His visible eye turned up in a smile. You do so much for this team by encouraging Sasuke. Enough! Sakura threw her arms in the air in anger, getting the attention of half the hopefuls through her outburst. The Uchiha is a spoiled little pretty boy who can't love a single person other than himself. He's so totally useless in a relationship that his hand probably gets a headache. The boy I thought I was in love with doesn't exist. Because the Uchiha has turned out to be a selfish, useless jerk. And I can't think of any other boy in Konoha that isn't 1,000 times better suited to making a girl happy except for you, sensei. You've got to be the only male as insecure about your feelings as that poo-wielding emo bandit. And don't you think for a minute I didn't notice how disturbing it was that you fondled Naruto's ass in our genin test? A circle of shock spread outward from this outburst, and Kakashi suddenly got ashamed as he felt the glares on him. Spying Orange, the pink-haired girl flung herself across the courtyard, then she wrapped herself around the blonde, crying, "Take me now! Naruto-sama!" A handful of resets that could have landed them an interrogation about who they were and how they'd infiltrated the village, causing a reset. This time when Kakashi dragged the pair, consisting of a resigned Naruto and a struggling Sakura, in front of Ibiki, the torture and interrogation specialist simply formed a set of seals, and without bothering to mold any chakra at all, because Kakashi's Sharingan was covered, so he wouldn't notice, declared, "There is nothing wrong with them. My guess is the girl simply clued into the fact that the Uchiha barely qualifies as human, and that you like him only because you are scarcely any better. It is my expert opinion that both of you are damaged. The true remedy for this is therapy for you and the Uchiha." Enko stepped out from around a corner, dressed modestly and arms folded in sober seriousness. "I concur. Post-traumatic stress. It's fairly common," Tsunade appeared to declare. "Frankly, I'd call you both unfit for duty, but wouldn't want to punish the poor genin who's already had to put up with you two by failing them out of this exam early. Really, they are to be commended for having put up with you selfish pair of bastards this long. Definite signs of stable minds there, just the sort of people we want to serve as ninja unlike you and the Uchiha, who, to put it frankly, are a wigged-out pair of self-absorbed basket cases." Kakashi had begun looking around at these new arrivals wildly by the time Shizune, hefting Taunton in her arms, declared, having put up with an unstable teammate and abuse from their teacher this long argues in favor of them being strong, dependable sorts the kind Konoha needs as leaders. Ibiki found himself nodding. "Very well. I suppose I can allow them in as just a two-man team. It's not without precedent. You too." He pointed at Naruto and Sakura, before slashing his arm back to point toward the test chamber. "Get in there. And good luck to both of you." Kakashi looked down to note that Tsunade had already taken hold of his arm, and with her super strength, he wasn't about to get away without leaving it behind. As she led him away, she invited, "Now Kakashi, tell me about your mother." Shortly afterward, Sasuke found himself wearing a straitjacket in a padded room of Konoha's hospital, and wondering what had happened. Kakashi, in the same situation across the hall, wondered much the same. Kin was not the only one to have seen the utility of a well-sprung carriage. Others were now learning how to grow their own, now that Naruto provided a blueprint in the form of the one he built for her. The combination of a shadow clone driver, wooden horses, and a few wooden soldiers to act as footmen was also a clear advantage in the realm of long-distance travel. Frankly speaking, they could go nearly anywhere in friendly territory in a matter of nights. That was an advantage in several aspects. For one, it meant they could skip out on the whole ambush on the way to Suna time loop pattern very easily just by sending a native back to her home. Temari arrived by carriage, clone and wooden horses, at her home village of sand, stepped out and nodded to the gate guards before roof-hopping to her home. There, she inscribed a few seals on the floor, and used the summoning trick for calling exam instructors they'd adapted for calling Tsunade so she'd arrive in Konoha without a 2-day walk, called the entire Kitsune clan there. As the smoke cleared, revealing everyone, the Sand Kunoichi looked over the costumes they'd prepared to look native in, then waved to show her village. Welcome to my home. Come on, let me show you guys around. Baki, the Sand Team's Jonin leader, stood tall and looked around behind that half veil he wore over part of his face. I'd best call the village council together and inform them of Orochimaru's ruse. With that, the man vanished. Well, it'll be good to know whether that works or not, Anko allowed, casting a glance aside at Ayam while sitting down on a low wall. Ayam shrugged. Her father had reacted poorly to the resets. Apparently not every mind could handle the strain, and there was also the fact that running a cooking stall had a considerable amount of drudgery to it that did not go well with infinitely repeating time eliminating what little variation there was. She pleaded with him to just close the shop for the duration of the resets, but the man had been too stubborn to, and now. Well, she'd been forced to let her father go back to life unaware that time was resetting around them. Instead, the ramen stand waitress had found herself the girl with the best opportunity to bring Baki into the resets, as the stand Jonin ate in her stall on the morning of the first test. She'd learned to trust it, as he was not a bad guy, merely one who was stuck in a bad situation, doing the best he knew how. Now everybody but Gaara on the Sand team was aware of and participating in the time loops. And he couldn't, as he was another container. But, as Baki's sponsor so to speak, whenever somebody had problems or issues with the Sand Jonin's behavior, Ayam was somewhat responsible for him. Being new to the resets, Baki found it difficult to bend to the Kitsune clan's authority, and often went off on his own for things. It made Ayam wonder if they were going to be able to keep him, or if she'd be bringing another person in his place soon. Frankly, the thought wasn't that appealing. At least they'd left Gaara back home in Konoha for this first foray to his village. Kankuro stood and stretched, putting on a glad face under all that makeup. Man! It's so good being home. Temari folded her arms and did not comment. She'd been part of the resets for so long now she barely even remembered this place. Meeting the eyes of her fellow wives, that message got conveyed nonverbally, and it was Kin who took the lead. Wow! The former Sound Kunoichi enthused. You know, I've never been to this place. Do you think you'd mind showing us around your village? Nah. The puppet user waved off her concerns. It'd be fun. Come on, first let me show you around our home, since you'll be staying with us. Welcome to the humble Sabaku residence. The mansion was what might be expected of the clan seat for the leader of the village. Construction in Suna would not have been out of place in an Old West movie, although with less wood visible and more adobe. Windows were generally small, thin and high up, to let in less light and hot daytime air, with shutters that could be flung open at night to allow the heat to go out. The roofs were flat, and signs showed that people slept on top of their houses more often than inside them, to escape the heat. Already it was looking very different from Konoha. Water is a commodity here, Temari began explaining, as they all started to head inside the much cooler interior of the building. You'll find some wells, but the water table around here hides deep, and isn't strong. So much of our water comes in by wagon. We send merchant trains to other countries, and they come back having filled up great barrels and urns in places like River and Rain. Rain country is among the best, since excess water is a nuisance there, so they don't even charge us for filling up. She made a face. But since they have to haul it in over dozens or hundreds of miles, water isn't cheap. So no flush toilets, and sponge baths are the common method of staying clean. Anything else wastes too much water. Tenten patted one of her scrolls, smiling. Luckily, we brought enough with us to probably qualify as a merchant caravan. Yes, Temari sighed. But if we use it too obviously, you'll stand out as strangers. Kankuro was chuckling. You'd be surprised by how many of our people take years of study in our ninja academy just to learn the basic survival jutsu. Sunblock and sandstride are a big deal around here. But also, anyone who can manage enough earth affinity to do that camping trick for distributing waste beneath the ground, well, they'll always have work around town keeping our pit toilets clean. It's not glamorous, but somebody's got to do it, or it begins to smell like something awful. The puppet user pinched his nose. Tsunade was unruffled as she responded. With that amount of organic material spread around your towns, the soil would be quite remarkable. If the water problem could be solved, plants could grow like mad around here. Good soil, lots of sunlight, water's the only problem left. Well, There's actually too much heat and sun for most plants to grow around here, Temari sighed. Believe me, it's been tried. Most just burn to death in the intense heat, no matter the amount of water they're given. Ah! Enough of that. We're here to have fun, Kankuro declared. Who here wants to go out to see a puppet show? Seeing everyone look at him like he was odd, Temari decided to come to her brother's rescue. It's actually more fun than you'd think. It's everything you'd get out of a live theater production, plus a ton of things living actors couldn't do, like when the villain gets stabbed, he actually gets stabbed. No amount of faking, 'cause they don't need to. Monsters look like monsters, and not even a ninja could tell they aren't real actors. Suna puppet shows are the best, Kankuro declared firmly. By mutual agreement, they'd already decided to allow themselves to enjoy their first trip as a clan to Suna as a sort of vacation. There wasn't a lot left in Konoha that could interest them, other than their training or those funky games playing with people's heads. And while those were fun, after a fashion, they also paled before real entertainments. They'd seen every movie that could be scrounged out of the most forgotten basements in their home village. The prospect of a real night out on the town going to a show none of them had ever seen before was more priceless than gold or jewels. So they went. They had a great time, and enjoyed snacks they hadn't eaten before, watched a show they'd never seen before, sat next to people they didn't know as well as they knew themselves, and generally had a blast. Of course, new sights, new smells, candy most of them had never had before, and a show none among them had seen before, while an excellent vacation away for the dull and boring sameness, did not resolve all concerns as it only posed new questions. I can't believe they took a gallon of water as admittance costs at the door instead of cash, Kin murmured, wide-eyed over the change. Don't be, Temari smiled. You can't drink cash. And like I said, water is a commodity around here. You can run out of cash and still be alright. But you can't run out of water and be. There's got to be more water than what gets brought back by caravans, Kurenai mused. There is. Kankuro nodded. Like Temari said, we have a few wells, and the water rations from those are like shares in a mine, valuable, and typically bought up by powerful clans or rich individuals. But also most of our D-rank missions are what we call water runs. Which, before anyone asks, they take a sealing scroll with a dozen empty 30-gallon barrels, go out to fill them up in a water-rich country like rain, then bring them back. The puppet user grinned at their guests. A dozen gallons a day for 30 days, drinking water for a family of 4 for a month, for anyone who can afford the price of a D-ranked mission. Not so bad, eh? And not so bad for the genin teams, either, Temari mentioned. It doesn't take long before they get the idea of taking on 4 or 5 of those missions at once, even up to a dozen, and just staying an extra day or so at the lake or river they were sent to, filling up all the barrels. As a consequence, water runs are actually the cheapest D-rank you can hire, since the genin will most probably be doing several of them at once. She rolled around to face the rest of Clan Kitsune. And before anybody asks what this teaches, I'll tell you, she volunteered with a smile. First and most important, it gets our genin comfortable in long treks across the desert. They aren't much used to the village until they've got that skill down, so the sooner they learn it the better, and the water runs are excellent for teaching that, as the faster they get back the sooner they get paid. And along the way they have to learn how to pack and carry what they need on those trips, master their own water usage, and any lingering flaws in their desert survival skills or chakra techniques get ironed out in a practical environmental test. She crossed an admonishing eye over her clanmates, some of whom were sweating. Blushing, the guilty ones began putting their lax sunblock chakra exercise back into practice. It teaches more than just that. Kankuro sat them all down at an outdoor cafe in the shade, signaling a waiter with their order using half a dozen hand signs even as he went right on talking to their visitors. Sealing and unsealing barrels into storage scrolls not only gets you comfortable using them, but it is just one more chakra exercise teaching stamina and control. The more of them you can do in a day, the more water runs you can fulfill on a single trek across the desert. One is about all a genin team can do to start with. Sealing a dozen barrels full of water isn't easy as that's a large amount of mass and weight, but they learn to do it more quickly. The waiter arrived and set out glasses of drinks before departing. Temari took hers up and toasted the group. It's not alcohol. Nobody around here drinks, as alcohol consumption increases your need for water. Common folk can't afford to, but the water waste creates enough stigma against it that those who are rich enough to afford it don't bother either. As Naruto and several of her clan sisters discovered, to their surprise, they were actually quite needy and gulped down the drinks. Kankuro just signaled for another round, placing a paper note on the table to pay for it all. The second round came quickly. This time they noted, as they took longer drinking them and sipped instead of gulped, they were actually quite fruity and flavorful. Fruit juices provide energy, and cover up the mineral tang and touch of salt used to create these. You lose more than just water sweating, Kankuro remarked, finally touching his own glass. Temari smiled her approval at him. Her brother was doing quite well as a guide, and their relationship as siblings had grown stronger ever since he'd been admitted into the resets. Frankly, having techniques to shut down Gaara helped most of all. It meant they could relax their guard a bit, and be people more than they used to. Temari and Kankuro were only just rediscovering what it meant to be family, and they liked the feeling of knowing someone else had your back in more than just combat. Of course, water runs teach more than desert survival. Temari continued to grin her approval to her brother. Though the countries they go to are friendly, they do have to cross borders into other elemental territories. For most of our ninja, that is their first glance into forests or plains, first look at any kind of plants, really. So getting them used to the idea of another territory is not a bad idea all by itself. And it's a bad teacher who doesn't stop and give them a few survival exercises on those new types of terrain the first few times they cross them, or practice stealthy crossings on later trips. We couldn't do any missions effectively outside our own country if we didn't, her brother agreed, before sipping more of his drink. So really a couple hundred water runs gives an excellent start to a ninja, plenty of practice of basic skills, and enough money to outfit themselves decently. Yes, but what happens during a war? Hana pressed, the Inuzuka heiress seeing through the surface. You'd want your ninja doing more than shopping trip-style errands to keep the town alive. And you might have lost relations to those countries you fill up at. Wouldn't an aqueduct be better? It's been tried about 4 or 5 times. Kankuro scowled, putting down his glass. It never works out right. Dang things always serve as a road pointing straight toward us. Most of our defense is armies or ninja invaders getting lost out in the desert, and that doesn't happen when they can just follow the aqueduct straight to us, and invaders always cut them anyway, so the water they ought to supply doesn't arrive and we end up relying on our emergency cisterns anyway. So eventually we just tore the dang things down. Finishing off his drink, the puppet master left a tip and stood. Besides, we've got emergency water supplies underground. The exact capacity is classified, as are the real entrances and access points. But they're enough to weather a good long siege. And if it comes right down to it, we've got another chakra exercise we learned from Hidden Mist. Those island dwellers learned a way to separate out drinkable water from seawater. Rather clever of them, but they needed it considering how many of those islands of theirs are too small to support fresh water springs. Anyway, if hostile relations block our access to our usual partners in the water trade, we can send our genin on water runs to the shoreline to fill up there. All of our teams have to practice that at some point in our careers, his sister stated, chin resting on folded hands before she too stood up. About half of our genin can do that, and all our ninja higher up. Once you reach a certain point, the mission office gives you that requirement on your water runs to make certain you develop the ability so we have that talent to fall back on in an emergency. It also helps out with negotiations with our neighbors for water rights, as they know they don't have a knife to our throats, that we could do this just fine on seawater alone. Besides, it's a great chakra control exercise for our genin. Kankuro smirked as he began to lead them away. We get so much practice in our various exercises, I'd pit our chakra control and reserves against the ninja of any other village. We're literally practicing all the time, and have tons of different exercises. Although, he gave a gentle stare to the group he was leading around, the most basic are still the most important. Several individuals of the clan rather sheepishly restarted their sunblock techniques, having let them slip as their attention wandered. Those performers did pretty well for themselves, Anko observed, trying to draw attention away from the fact that her shirt was wet with sweat. But they didn't wear any headbands. Yuga objected, speaking of what she'd observed during the after-show stand-up for applause the puppet masters had achieved. Course not. Kankuro chuckled, glancing aside to meet her eyes. You know about our daimyo reducing our ninja forces. What you don't know is our bounce-back strategy for when he wises up and changes his mind. Temari, too, was chuckling. All ninja forces suffer losses. It's a regular part of doing business. Some retire, some desert, and more than a few are killed in ninja battles that are just a regular part of doing missions. So we still have to have a ninja academy to train up replacements. And like most villages, most of those who graduate from our academy are not accepted as genin. But just because a person doesn't have a ninja rank or run missions doesn't mean they ought to stop having ninja skills, Kankuro supplied with a knowing smirk, before turning back to face the course they were following. I told you before, sunblock and sand stride, our most basic chakra control exercises, are almost essential to life out here. Tons of people learn them, even those who have no ambition to become ninjas. What that means is, Temari smirked at her home's plan, we have tons of civilians, failed genin really, who practice those so much they have better chakra reserves and control than most of your. Several of them go on their own water runs, not hiring genin to do those for them. With more puppet masters than you might believe? Kankuro smirked, then waved their attention over to a loading dock where a number of puppets were at work unloading a wagon, while their masters stayed in the shade. So they do all sorts of things like that. Work people hard and they sweat, and water costs money, so you have to pay them more or else they won't get enough water and they'll die. But puppets cost nothing to feed, don't overheat, and can work like mules without ever needing a sip. We teach puppet mastery in our ninja academy, and those failed genin handle most of the heavy work. They also do puppet shows, like you saw earlier, Temari explained. Life out here is hard enough, people take all the advantages they can get. But that violates the basic covenant between ninja villages and their feudal lords, Shizen observed. One of the conditions all countries share is that ninja skills are to be restricted to practicing ninja. With the exception of academy students, Kankuro smirked. And we get around that by never removing these failed genin from our academy roles. They don't get listed as any class but the one they ought to have graduated in, under did not make genin rank. But we never actually remove them as students. Tons of villages allow students to continue trying to test for genin even after they've failed a time or two. Someone has to have talked, Enko observed cynically. We don't tell genin how they are getting around the law, Temari stated authoritatively. That's a B-class secret, and not available for academy students or their genin friends to know, so they can't blow it. And those who can't keep their mouths shut? The special asked. Get declared missing ninja and executed on sight. The tales they tell are dismissed as wild stories, and at worst we have to practically shut down the town while some samurai ride through on an inspection tour where everyone dresses in rags and pretends to be more miserable than we are. Then the fun toys come back out again after they're gone, and everyone is so grateful for what we let them have that the daimyo would take away that the secret gets safer every time someone tries to blow it. Besides, this only goes on in Suna itself, and our climate is unfriendly enough people don't exactly come here if they can avoid it. So we're pretty isolated, and that helps keep this secret. Temari laughed. Most of the population of Wind Country stays along our coastline, where life is easier. Temari supplied, smiling as she looked around, remembering places from her childhood. The climate is nice there. The heat is not so bad, and this infernal wind is not as much of a problem. So easily 90% of our people live along our coasts. The population is pretty sparse out here in the trackless desert that makes up the center of Wind Country. You only have small mining towns and us ninja, for the most part, and we ninja come out here to be alone. We like privacy. Several of our deep cover agents have recently been exposed, Baki told the assembled Sand Council. I have managed to safely withdraw them to Suna, as their information is priceless. Several of the assembled ninja nodded soberly. The Council of Konoha was made up largely of civilians, and had power grab issues. The Council of Suna could not afford either problem. The village of Hidden Sand was a military base, filled with military personnel, and had military problems. Civilians there existed only to provide services, not to pass judgment on problems outside their areas of expertise. And the Wind Lord had gone far enough toward destroying the whole town through his various edicts that they couldn't afford any petty squabbling or infighting. Actually, the Ninja Council had a surprising amount of unity, in that they were all opposed to a common enemy who continually sought their destruction, the Wind Lord, daimyo of their own country. However, life wasn't all fun and games either. It is against policy to retrieve agents who must then be added to our ranks as active duty shinobi, one of the senior clan heads reminded. Baki winced. The man was head of the Mantis, and their previous Kazekage had been fool enough to make the man's own daughter a deep cover agent, then forbidden her retrieval when she was revealed. While the man was far from irrational, he had gotten his daughter reassigned to another country rather than killed. Past bitterness would make his acceptance difficult. And many other of the clan heads had their own bitter experiences to match his. Not for the first time, Baki counted their past Kazekage a fool. He'd made enemies he didn't need in far too many areas, not excepting his own family. Fortunately, in this case that actually counted as an advantage. Will you make no exception for Tsunade of the Sannin? Baki asked, getting those old ninja to gape, open-mouthed at him. He smirked. He couldn't help it. And the information she and her party brings is that our Kazekage has been assassinated, replaced by Orochimaru, also of the Sannin. Oh yes. Baki would have these people eating out of his hand in under an hour. Tsunade walked on her own through the streets of Suna. They all knew the plan was to present themselves as deep cover agents being returned on the uncovering of their identities. That was really the only way to get acceptance they needed inside the village while still using their ninja abilities. It granted them the freedom of the town, despite whatever the council said about putting them on as active duty ninja or not. As if thinking by themselves, her feet had drawn her to the Suna hospital. It didn't take her long to assess the place, dingy and miserable. In her intelligence brief, Yugao had presented Konoha as being too tender-hearted to be good at information gathering. But that had a flip side as well. Tender-hearted people want their sick or injured comrades to get well. Suna, however, had so many eager young students competing for slots on the active duty roster it was often easier to just replace ninja than to heal them. That cost them more than just sympathy. They lost experience when older shinobi perished, and the battlefield awareness that often comes out of a close brush with death, a brush all too often accompanied by injuries. You nearly kill a ninja and he gets much more cautious the next time, and there was a direct proportion between how serious the wounds were and how long they remembered those lessons. So Suna had an interesting conundrum. Between the various factors of the often hard life led in the village, their worst ninja were really very good. But out of the harsh attitudes that developed because of that hard life, their best ninja were not so hot compared to other countries. Outside of their own unique environment, that is. On their home turf, the ninja of sand could kill anyone. The village had many strengths: puppet users, a preponderance of wind jutsu, and the generally excellent chakra control and store of its members. But for all their sterling qualities, medicine was not among them. Their callousness had given them what were, in Tsunade's honest opinion, the worst medics of any of the 5 great villages. They just didn't care enough about saving people, or spare enough attention to getting it right to be good. Which, again, might tie into and support their amount of puppet users. The Sannin spoke aloud to herself, shaking her head. I sure wouldn't want to be wounded in this village. No wonder they prefer indirect fights. She sternly disapproved. Since the village is accepting you guys back mostly because I married Naruto here, I hope none of you guys mind taking on the Sabaku clan name of Gaara and Kankuro and I, just so long as you are here. It's just easier to tell people you are my family. Naruto gave a nervous Temari a cuddle while smiling. But Temari-chan, you are family. Yes, I know, the Wind Mistress gave him a quick peck on one cheek. But I also know you guys are used to a close association by your own clan named Kitsune. Yes, but we are also ninja. Kunoichi especially ought to be used to going by a different name. Hinata also gave the older girl a hug. Besides, what's all this you guys stuff? Tenten came up to add herself to the growing group cuddle. You practically outrank me when it comes to seniority among Naruto's wives. It's still a difficult question, Temari smiled back to the younger girl. They truly become close friends. He got romantic with me first, but was training under you earlier, and was already quite fond of you. And we all know Naruto-kun. Hinata giggled while the boy blushed. I am noted, with some respect, that, even though it obviously pained her, Sakura stayed silent during this exchange, despite the fact that she could have argued to be most senior of all for Naruto's affections. The other girls plainly felt she'd lost her place and been disqualified, that it was sustained, and returned, affection that formed a solid bond, so the only kind that counted. But the Pinkette had never been shy about disagreeing over anything before being admitted to the resets. Indeed, insisting on getting her way had once been her trademark, and it got noticed by more than just Iam that the girl was not rising to the bait here. Almost grudgingly, they admitted in their hearts that scored her points. Sakura could have risen up and argued the point, losing what little respect they had been building for her, but the pink-haired kunoichi seemed to have genuinely begun to change. It did not escape anyone's attention that Sakura was trying terribly hard to get back in their good graces. It was not possible for anyone to be more disillusioned by someone than Sakura had been by the Uchiha in that desert fight against the forces of sand, and that had begun to work changes on her character. She was no longer blindly supportive of the Sharingan heir, and so had to recreate herself almost totally, as blind devotion to Sasuke had made up a significant portion of her attitude and goals over most of her life, and now had to be replaced by something else. Naturally, once that bias got stripped away, there wasn't a lot left of the old Sakura for the new one to recycle. To no one's surprise, she didn't entirely eliminate the blind devotion aspect of her personality. She'd merely changed to whom it applied, and the obvious target for it was Naruto. Sakura herself didn't think of it in those harsh and clinical terms. From her standpoint, she'd gone from a loved and popular kunoichi to the very bottom of the social pecking order in nothing flat. Any girl loves to be loved, and most adore being popular. That she'd enjoyed that situation while it lasted was no surprise to anyone. But it was Naruto who'd loved her, not Sasuke. Only by the time she'd figured out that the boy who'd once loved her had spent several years getting over her already. The Queen of England does not expect to wake up one morning and discover that she is a scullery maid who dreamed all the romance, wealth, position, and power. Any girl on the top of her social ladder resents suddenly finding herself on the bottom. Of course, resentment did her no good. But it did a lot to explain why she wanted Naruto back. His love and support had been the greatest privilege of her life. Before, it had enabled her to stay upbeat while surviving the Uchiha's put-downs. Now, though, she'd rather she had it for its own sake. Naruto was a person worth loving in her eyes now. Yes, that was terribly fickle of her, but sadly not unusual. One person's trash is another's treasure, and so on. Most girls don't see guys as valuable until those guys already have other girls after them. It's a bit shallow, but young people often are. If youthful mistakes were crimes, no one would survive to adulthood. Besides, girls often proudly state they have the privilege of changing their minds. Of course, no matter how logical or reasonable, or just typical, a progression that was for a young girl's thoughts of the heart, it didn't incline Naruto any more towards liking her. That girl had hurt him consistently for years. But Sakura was a driven person and, in her own right, nearly as stubborn as Naruto, and she was determined to wear him down. The other girls sheltered him as much as they could, because they honestly held a poor opinion of her, but the pink-haired girl still wormed her way through to do nice things for Naruto from time to time. So the boy soon found himself faced with a choice. He could either accept the kind acts Sakura was trying to do for him, or he could pull an Uchiha and grunt and spurn them heartlessly. Put that way, it was obvious which way he'd choose to go. Wanting to be nothing like the brat who'd had everything and appreciated nothing, Naruto put on a kind face and accepted Sakura's offerings when he didn't have a valid excuse not to. It didn't mean he liked it, or her, or that the wound she'd given his heart had gone away, but he was determined to be polite about things and not become a second Uchiha. However, receiving acts of kindness does gradually wash away previous hurts, and Sakura begins to trust that she'd make eventual progress. This worried the girls around Naruto, who felt they had cause for concern. Seeing a few passerby nodding respectfully to Temari, some eyebrows got raised and Hana had to ask, "That's not just a weapon, is it? Somehow that big fan on your back is also a badge of some sort, isn't it?" The Sand Lady smiled in reply, telling her friends and family, "Wind users are respected around here more than you might think. Without us to regularly blow the streets clean of accumulated dust and grit, our village could be buried under a gradual buildup of what the natural winds blow in." She favored the group with a confident smile, posing with her shoulders back. "That's actually one of the other really common D-ranked missions we get in Sand, to go around to all of the mining towns that are out here in the desert with us and blow the streets clean. The first few times you have to do it are really hard. It's exhausting even for the best of us to learn how to move that much wind and control it, even after all of our basic chakra exercises. Too much or too fast, you blow houses down. Too little or too slow, and you don't accomplish anything. Get your control wrong and you'll fling houses or swirl the dust in place, or even draw more sand into town." She paused, smacking her lips in appreciation for the effort long since gone through. "But without us, the dunes would swallow everything man made out here in short order. So, if you want to know why we are famed for our wind users, there's your answer. We've got to be good, and our practice makes us so. And the giant fan? I am asked pleasantly. Are given only after you've been granted acknowledged mastery. They don't do a thing but augment your wind techniques, but they are useful for that. Temari still preened a bit under the attention. It had been a long time for her feeling an outsider looking in while at Konoha village, and it was nice to be back on home turf again, not the least because it made her important, made her the guide and instructor when for so long she'd been the one learning. It was nice to be a student, to learn and master new things. It was also nice to be valued for one's knowledge from time to time. Then she drooped, recalling something. Favoring her family through marriage with a somewhat sad smile, she told them, also, there is another reason why I like to bear this fan. It was my mother's. Not only was she a great wind mistress, but she made fans like this one. This was one of her favorites. Instantly she got consumed in more hugs. Kankuro cleared his throat once all this mushiness threatened to become unbearable. Ahem. Once he had their attention, he continued, liking to be the guide and instructor no less than his sister. Clearing the streets is one thing, but not the most important or prestigious post for a wind mistress. The good ones graduate out of that stage early. Into what? Ino asked perkily. Shizen, who had traveled a lot, interrupted with her own smile. Have you ever wondered what makes a wind country so great? Metals and the tools and weapons made from them, Ino answered instantly. That was one of the first things Naruto told us from what he'd learned talking to these two. And Konoha uses lots of weapons made in Suna. Tenten agreed. Kurenai could see where this was going and continued the test. But the mines are all out here in the desert at the heart of wind country. Most of the population lives on the coast. What do they do for a living? The younger kunoichi all shared puzzled glances among themselves. Wind, Taiya answered simply, lifting up her flute. Hey! I learned the basics for my chakra puppet techniques from a missing ninja from Sand, who came to Sound after being recruited. I ought to know a few things about this place. I do play a wind instrument, after all. You hear a few things when you pause and listen to people who know how to ask questions. It's not like this is any big secret. Most of you have just led sheltered lives in Konoha till now. She's right, Kurenai interrupted before this could become a fight. When you understand economics, it's truly very simple. Common people make up most of the populations of every country, and common people do not have access to sealing scrolls, special techniques, or any of the many ways we ninja have to get ourselves around. It all comes down to trade. Shizen took over, at last answering her own question posed at the start of this minor discussion. Common people have only two ways of moving goods back and forth. They can carry it over land, or they can float it by water. What you can carry by hand, beast, or cart is comparatively small, so that is the more expensive way to move goods. Ships can carry arbitrarily large amounts, however. Just build a bigger hull. Also, a caravan of wagons and beasts of burden must rest at nights, but ships can move so long as there is wind to take them. So they go faster because they use the whole day and night to travel. So whenever anybody can, they move goods by ship instead of overland. Kurenai took back over this explanation. That's why most every town that isn't a ninja village tries to place itself on a navigable lake or river, if they're not on the coast to start with. It's the fastest, cheapest way to move cargo, Shizen agreed. So towns that have ready access to the sea trade are more prosperous by default. Ships move by wind, and guess who has enough wind mistresses to serve as street sweepers? Taiyuya informed the rest of the young kunoichi with a grin. That's what they graduate to, is that right? Kankuro nodded, pleased by their deductive ability. Yep. They started out as simple escort missions, just like anyone gets when they travel and are afraid of bandits, or in this case pirates. Ship captains regularly hired ninja to ride along with their boats and fight off anyone interested in stealing the cargo. Wherever you have trade, you have people willing to steal that trade, Hana, who tracked plenty of bandit camps, agreed. It is a source of wealth, and prosperity always draws parasites, Tsunade grumbled, still unhappy over the town's medical situation. She'd largely been staying silent as she continued contemplating that problem. Now Temari resumed her place leading this discussion. It was her specialty, after all. But one of those ships chased by pirates had a wind mistress from Suna on it, and moving dust out of villages teaches you more than anything else how to control large but gentle amounts of wind. Where most ninja would have torn apart the sails if they tried, she was able to fill up the sheets with wind without breaking them. They sped to safety. But it wasn't long before a captain asked if she could do that outside of an emergency. She could, and could get them to move 3 times as fast as most ships, the ones relying on natural winds, could go. Most winds blow about pretty chaotically, Shizen agreed. So relying on natural wind means using whatever you can get, and you end up not going quite in the right direction most of the time. Using wind mistresses from Suna got around that. Also, you didn't have to rely on the natural strength of whatever wind you happened to find, but could afford to go full force, all of the time. Temari smiled. In whatever direction you wanted to travel. Thus was born the C or even B-class escort/propulsion missions. Move ships fast? Hire a kunoichi of hidden sand. So far we've been successful in keeping how to do it a secret. Most villages have tried propulsion using wind techniques, but end up tearing the sheets, breaking masts, or even tipping the ships over, Taiya agreed. So far only Suna's wind mistresses have had a delicate enough touch. Which comes from our street sweeping, but that's an A-class secret, the Suna wind mistress nodded. Not that anybody envies us for the practice, she finished out with a grin. It does seem like pretty lowly labor. The daimyo acted quickly to restrict the practice of hiring Suna kunoichi as propulsion to his own ships, and wind country merchants he favors, but we've got more shipping than you'd believe possible. Kankuro explained, rolling his eyes over those acts of nobility, yet pleased by the shipping. It is only fair, we have more coastline than any other elemental country, Temari returned. We have to do something to survive, and you may have noticed food doesn't grow here. We save half the cost of importing it ourselves, rather than paying for third parties to carry it to us. Yeah, but what do you trade for it? Not everyone needs weapons, unless you deal solely with ninja villages, Tenten jokingly observed. Glass, Temari, Kankuro, and Taiya all answered together. Everybody needs windows, Temari observed. And what else do you think all that is good for? Kankuro asked, pointing his thumb at the desert. And yes, Tsunade starting rubbing her temples at the idiocy involved, the Windlord, by his stupid self-destructive policies, is killing the goose that lays golden eggs, i.e. restricting numbers of ninja in the village that grants him those wind mistresses that make his fleet go so fast that it makes so much money. But he wouldn't be the first noble to be nutso, demanding results utterly contrary to his own edicts. Most of them have at least a little leaning toward that, Shizen admitted with a grimace. It comes from living sheltered in palaces most of their lives, denied any kind of contact with real people. Courtiers don't count. Back in Konoha, a Naruto clone watched a movie he'd seen enough times to quote in his sleep. Far from being an exercise in self-torture, the young man paid rapt attention to the screen. This DVD was available in both Japanese and English. Watching this well-known movie, whose Japanese lines he could quote without effort, speaking this time in English, the young man felt that he could finally penetrate the otherwise impenetrable code that was this English. Dynamic entry. Oh, hi Hinata. Naruto rubbed his eyes, then raised them admiringly to his first, and still best friend. Nice jumpsuit. Lavender really suits you. Thank you, Naruto-kun. She jumped forward to hug him, white legwarmers rising as her legs curled up behind her, giving herself totally to the embrace of her beloved blonde boy. So he didn't require you to paste on artificial eyebrows? The boy asked. Nope. Hinata caroled. He just wants to experiment, and see if a shadow clone can be destroyed by sheer exercise. Can it? Of course. She sang happily, still hugging him. I am clone number 5. Now he wants to quantify how much exercise it takes. But I wanted my Naruto break, so he gave me 5 minutes. How's it going? Taking the two-tone maiden into his lap, Naruto explained as he hugged her, the hardest part was getting the first little bit. Now I think I've cracked it, the rest should come more easily. Do you know they read left to right? Blue hair went flying as she shook her head. No. That sounds bizarre. Black really washed her out, and created a combination that was hard to find colors for, so she lightened her shade and discovered she was a bluinette under the distinctive Hyuga black. It was a look she was much happier with. Besides, it went quite nicely with her eye color. When the Kyuubi added the Hyuga white eyes to her decorations, she altered it enough to grant pupils to their irises, and eliminate the bulging veins problem. Now their eyes only turned that distinctive lavender white when activated, and Hinata had chosen to have eyes as blue as Naruto's most of the time. It was a tribute, but also went well with her new hair. Yeah, it's the little things like that that have been throwing me, he nodded. The duo cuddled for a bit before Hinata got up, pecked him on the cheek, and shouted dynamic exit. This is an exceptionally large group. If we accept these back, none of our academy graduates will be able to rise to genin this year. Baki grimaced. As he'd suspected, the council had no objections to accepting the legendary medic Tsunade back into the village. These were middle-aged and older men and women. Health had begun to fail in degrees for most of them, due in large part to the rigors of their environment, but also parts just began to grow older and frilier. And those for whom it had not well, they were aware that it would shortly. Age was a demon no ninja had yet truly defeated. Except perhaps the Kitsune clan. But Baki had yet to be totally convinced of that. For the elderly to accept the presence of arguably the best medic the ninja countries had ever produced, when their own native ones were so pathetic, and these elders knew it, was laughably simply to guess. Of course they would. She'd be giving geriatric treatments within minutes of this meeting. But a strong coalition of several members of the council, led by the head of the Mantis and filled for the most part by similarly bitter men, had mounting obstinate resistance to receiving the rest of the Kitsune clan. Thankfully, no one could prove they weren't deep cover agents. There were not any central records listing all of those working undercover. There could not be. If there was a storehouse, or a vault, or a file with that information on it, that object would be a target of ceaseless attacks, both open assaults and infiltrations, by enemy ninja. To find and crack such a file would be the ultimate espionage triumph, clearing away countless scores of agents the opposing ninja might not otherwise find. No, for such a file to exist would be suicide for a village's spy networks. So what records there were on deep cover agents were fragmentary and encoded. No one person knew them all, their covers and where they were to be found. Else if one person did, that person, be they clerk or kage, would be subject to frantic efforts to kidnap and interrogate them, just the same as enemy ninja would have gone after a paper file. So, rather than dangle out the ultimate golden mission fruit tempting other villages to constantly try and best your security, those files were kept well dispersed from each other, with a handful of trusted people managing only a fraction each of the total undercover pie. Even if such a person defected, or was captured, or died without passing control of those agents on, the village still lost only a portion of the network, and it was better to lose a little than to lose all. Baki, fortunately, was one such person, controlling a handful of deep cover agents. So, because of the compartmentalized system of handling them, no one at that table could tell whether or not he was lying about Clan Kitsune being made up of deep cover agents he might, or might not have control of. No, they didn't argue about that. Instead they chose to take the political tack and threaten not to accept them based on shinobi caps set by the Windlord. And that was a very hard position to argue them out of. Still, the joint leader of the team of the former Kazekage's offspring was far from out of options. It required revealing something he was not originally inclined to, but in a set of time loops if it did not go well this time they could try again, using another approach the next. Perhaps you should review their files. Baki began handing out paper forms with select ninja information filled in on each of the Kitsune clan ninja. Note they had been subject to secret experiments while in Konoha, and each is now an active bearer of the precious wood bloodline. No genin we could graduate this year would be the equal of any of these agents' qualifications. Once more Baki had them eating out of his hand. However, he noticed the head of the Mantis clan start visibly when the files being passed around reached him. Interesting. The man was usually more controlled than that. Baki was further shocked when the Mantis head, previously his most bitter and stubborn opponent on this issue, reviewed one of those files, then raised his head and said, shocking them all, I withdraw my objections. The coalition who'd resisted their inclusion crumbled after that. I'm surprised that Suna Ninja didn't kill the Wind Lord and make it appear to be an accident, Ino flippantly remarked. The adult kunoichi present winced. Kin turned to Taiya and observed, Konoha's education system really sucks, doesn't it? Probably because they were trying full-time to spike Naruto, and ended up getting the rest of us as well, Ino groused, before heaving a sigh and giving a resigned hand flap. Okay, tell me what I missed. Well, for one thing, you seem to think ninja are the only military force there is, Kin quipped, folding her arms. Well, aren't we? Sakura asked. Then, seeing the old and foreign kunoichi wince even harder, she tried to remedy that statement. I mean, I know there are hired soldiers, but those are only thugs, right? The approval she was fishing for did not materialize. Tsunade groaned, burying her face in her hands, while Anko got angry. Some of those teachers at the academy are going to die. I swear they will. Again? Hana asked. Again. Anko insisted hotly. Want some help? Yugao offered. Kurenai, who had been painfully rubbing her brows wondering what to say, gave it up and started lecturing, telling them what they'd missed. Okay, I had no idea they skipped this, so I'll just start at the beginning, okay? Okay. She got nods from all the eager young kunoichi who had formed an amphitheater around her, seated on their bottoms with legs drawn up and their arms wrapped around them. In the first place, government is force, she told them directly and up front. We have an emperor somewhere, but no one cares much about him because he has no ability to enforce his commands. He is a figurehead, with about as much real authority as a carving on a monument, respected, but ultimately powerless. Seeing she had their attention, she asked, so, with that being the case, why do feudal lords rule over countries? Shouldn't it be the strongest person? In which case, why don't the various kages rule their countries? The young kunoichi from Konoha looked at each other, unable to find an answer. Any government that is toothless may as well not exist, the teacher prompted. So how is it they are in charge? Where do they get their authority from? I'll give you a hint, it's not ninja. Kankuro stretched. We are a mercenary force that will apply our strength to any country. We don't bother enforcing a daimyo's authority at home. So who does? They'd have to have some kind of soldiers do it. Naruto appeared with a smokeless poof, proving he'd been listening all along. But that doesn't make sense. Those soldiers we fought at Wave were nothing. The least ninja could kill them in droves. That's correct, Naruto, Kurenai nodded, smiling fondly on the blonde. They do have soldiers, but they aren't the sort of gutter trash you fought at Wave. Samurai, spoke shortly. That's right. Kurenai nodded. The daimyo of each country sits at the head of his own fighting force, composed of aristocratic samurai, who rule the lands in his name, and fight for him when he calls for aid. There are about as many samurai in each country as ninja, and that is deliberate. Except in Wind, where the samurai are about triple, our ninja forces have been reduced, Kankuro observed coldly. Kurenai raised a palm to forestall questions. And before any of you ask, no. They are not any sort of cut-rate troops. In addition to administering the provinces of each country, large and small, and serving as the bureaucracy of sorts, each samurai is also a warrior, spending hours each day in honing their bodies and their minds, and those of you who recall your lessons on chakra know what that ought to do. It would expand their chakra capacity and control, Hinata answered. But what do they use it for? Chakra weapons and armor, Taiya interrupted bluntly. I'm not familiar with that. Naruto shook his head, leading most of the younger girls with him. This got Anko even more steamed, and she started muttering about doing terrible things to those academy instructors. Kurenai was silently vowing to help. Chakra armor creates a barrier, a field if you will, around the wearer that utterly negates any foreign chakra that enters. It also provides strong protection against blows. In practical terms, that makes them immune to illusions, elemental powers, and most other ninja techniques. They can afford to simply ignore them. A ball of fire would stop and fizzle just short of them, lighting vanish into the air rather than touch them. Even walls of earth raised by chakra crumble at their approach. Why don't we use that stuff? Ino broke in quickly. Because it diverts the wearer's chakra to do it, Shizen answered. You could put on a set, assuming you could obtain one, but you couldn't use any of the powers it would stop. No illusions, elemental abilities, or most ninja techniques. Any chakra you manifest outside your own body it would take and use for itself, powering that shield that protects you. That would still leave you with armed and unarmed combat techniques, Hinata observed. And guess what those samurai train exclusively in? Yugao asked. They have no need for our flashy ninja tricks, so they spend all their time focused on those things that can work for them armed and unarmed styles. And their weapons, she shook her head in remorse. Chakra swords can operate within and even penetrate the chakra shields created by the chakra armor. It's a contest of both wills and skill, Kurenai told them. But their chakra blades will carve through anything less, Yugao added. And just like it is illegal for anyone but ninja to use ninja skills, owning any of the special equipment that makes samurai what they are is also prohibited to anyone but samurai. There are rumors that Snow Country, I think, has a daimyo lax enough to not care about that standard, and that he's let some ninja from his village there obtain and practice experimenting on samurai equipment. I hear they are trying to modify it so it does not prohibit use of ninja skills, but actually enhances them. Taiyuya offered with a shrug. For what it's worth. I've heard that rumor too. Yugao nodded. But if that's so, the daimyo there must be singularly stupid. That's the one advantage samurai have over us ninja, and letting us play around with their gear could lead to a situation where shinobi could overthrow samurai rule. Be that as it may, Kurenai diverted this conversation so it was back on track. Mature samurai are profoundly skilled at armed and unarmed combat, immune to most if not all of our special ninja techniques, have powerful chakra, and she sighed. Their own techniques for using it. While I said that all external chakra manifested gets absorbed, and that is true, samurai are adept at many internal uses for chakra, chiefly enhancing their bodies so they can run faster, strike more quickly, become stronger, and otherwise perform beyond the normal human limits of their bodies. Samurai rule because they are powerful, Hana informed them, folding her arms as she leaned back against the wall. In far-gone days we shinobi could sneak in and assassinate them while they were asleep or otherwise at rest and not wearing their armor. But then they invented chakra fortresses, and those days are past. The castles they live in now have the same properties as their armor, absorbing all external chakra manifested in or near them to fuel a shield that protects them from harm. Internal chakra and samurai gear accepted, of course. So they have all their toys to defend themselves with at home, but ours get shut down if we go visiting. We can run fast and strike fast, but samurai can run and strike faster. For most of us the internal arts are a sideline, if we know them at all. But for a samurai, they are their entire focus. So on average they are much better at them than we are. Shizen interjected. Guy and Lee might be an exception, Hana smirked. Don't count on it. Tsunade observed coldly. Ninja are taught to use their chakra a certain way, and that bleeds over despite our intentions. Even my strength gets shut down inside those palaces. All sorts of stuff you'd think is internal isn't, because of the way ninja get taught to use their energies. Virtually all our training is on pushing chakra out of our bodies. Still, it seems there ought to be some way we could kill them, Ino mused. If we need to kill a samurai, we have to find him away from home, preferably alone, and exhaust him. Temari grunted, seating herself on a bench with more force than necessary. Looking at the rest, she said, the armor they use isn't free. They do have to feed chakra to it to keep those shields up. It's like any technique. Why else do you think they spend so much time enhancing their chakra reserves? They do need the energy. So couldn't we lay siege or something? Naruto offered the idea. Anko shook her head, arms also folded as she leaned across from Hana. If it were just the samurai, maybe. But there are actually 3 separate military forces in each country completely independent of each other, but ultimately all of them report to the daimyo. Ninja and now samurai you know of, Kurenai explained. The last are the monks. Monks? Several young voices echoed together. Yugao was nodding. There are several monasteries in each country. Before you ask, we've tried infiltrating them several times, and no, it doesn't work. They are better than the Yamanaka in detecting moles or sleeper agents. Also, they've got some way of enforcing binding oaths on their members. Why the secrecy? Hinata blinked curiously. Because the way they control the elements makes what we ninja do look sick, Anko declared, dropping her arms to stand tall. They don't use hand seals, nor do they rely on specific techniques. A monk who has studied fire can control that like Gaara does his sand. The country of fire is not actually named for anything to do with Konoha, Shizen softly declared, but for the excellent quality of the fire monks who study there. The country of lightning the same, Hana sighed over her folded arms. Ninja do not revolt against their lords because those lords could call down monks out of the monasteries, as well as their own samurai against us, and we could not survive. We'd be forced to flee again. Does anyone know how those monks do their screening? Hinata asked. No. Only that it seems perfect, Yugao replied. And before you talk about Kyubi, or any of the tailed beasts, There are more forces at work in this world than just demons. Some monasteries are rumored to control dragons. Feudal lords are lords because of the balance of militaries they control. Anko summed up. If any one of the three forces get out of line, they can use the other two to correct that. The monks are just as much into armed and unarmed combat and internal body enhancement training as the samurai, so can pose a threat to them even in their homes. But of the three, it is the samurai who are toughest to beat, Yuga agreed. And that is why they are in charge. Clan Kitsune was on vacation. That meant many things, but mostly it meant mental stimulation, going out and finding new things without laying down requirements for doing anything right this time. That was the only way they had to relax anymore, and they were determined to enjoy it. Besides, so far it has been fun. Part of what that meant, of course, was to go out and discover stuff, and since not everyone held the same interests and the same priority, occasionally that meant going off on your own. They actually did a fair bit of that, as stuff you discovered while you were out by yourself could be discussed with those who hadn't seen it, and lead to all new conversations, another form of all-too-rare treat for them. So Tenten was off to look into some of those smithies she'd been hearing about, when she ran into a large man in green armor blocking her path. "You have returned," the man told her in sober tones. Tenten was confused, not sensing any hostility or threat from the man. Then she recalled the cover story they were using. They were all supposed to be deep cover agents who'd been uncovered and retrieved. So she shot him a smile. "Yup. Baki ought to have told the council by now, right?" The man cocked his head at her. "You do not remember me?" Now Tenten was stumped, staring at him in confusion. "No, sorry. I haven't any idea what you're talking about." The man casually unfolded his arms and waved a one-handed seal before her face. "Remember." "So, if we're supposed to be deep cover agents, won't we stand out? I mean, part of the reason we are here is that most of us know nothing about this town. That ought to trip us up right away. Wouldn't it?" Kurenai smiled fondly at Hinata's objections, and ruffled the girl's hair. "No, not actually." "But why?" Ino asked. The same question had been troubling her. This time it was Anko who smirked and took over the conversation. "Because there are two great dangers to undercover assignments. The first great one is the one everyone fears, being uncovered as a foreign agent. But we go to such extreme lengths to avoid that, layering our agents in false personalities and getting them to delve deeply into their roles to avoid the guys searching for agents like them, that we actually create the second big one, forgetting who you really are, who you work for, and what your job actually is." Yuga nodded. "That's right. People live for a fairly long time, but we have to replace field agents almost constantly. Do you know why? It's because most of those who don't get caught submerge their true loyalties so deeply they forget their original roles and lives. You can't get information out of such a person, so they have to be replaced. It's called going native, and it happens to most agents who don't get caught early on." Anko sighed, shaking her head sadly. "A human mind is not built to deceive itself for long. Any cover deep enough to get you clear of counterintel types will slowly overcome the reality you are trying to hide, until the lie is your reality. The number of people who can sustain them both and balance the razor's edge between what they present to others as real, and what truly is real, is surprisingly few and may itself be a mental disorder," Shizen admitted. "So even successful spies have to be replaced all the time," Anko admitted. Shizen was pondering. "The problem could be avoided if we could withdraw our agents from their cover assignments regularly to reinforce the original's personality, skills, and goals. But that would take at least a month out of every year, and you can tell that every ninja village's counterintelligence people would be looking for those patterns." After that, the first apprentice to the legendary medic shrugged. Some of the sleeper or deep cover agents who go native could be helped and their memories restored if they could be reached. But that is the hard part. Anko leaned back and crossed her arms behind her head, chewing on a dango stick. "Also, you can imagine the nightmare of trying to convince a person to go back to a life she doesn't want, just as you've finished correcting all the damage it did to her psyche." "It would be cruel," Shizen agreed. "Heartless, more like," Hana snorted. Yugao sighed and looked out across the skyline. Intelligence is one of those fields that takes a regular flow of people and chews them up into wasted shells, either caught and destroyed or lost to their delusions forever. But the villages keep doing it, because we have to. Konoha doesn't do much of it compared to most others, and I can't say I mind that policy. But I also believe I've mentioned that we replaced the costs of running a successful intelligence network with the equally terrible costs of getting blindsided by events. And if anyone knew of a way to fix it, we wouldn't have this problem, Ino summarized, jumping ahead of her teachers to say it. Sadly, this is so, Kurenai agreed. Hi guys. The group looked up as Tenten rejoined them. She seemed rather subdued as she turned a pale face on them in the courtyard of the Sabako home they'd been using for this discussion. Is something the matter? Hinata scooted close, and sensing the other girl needed comfort, hugged her. Tenten nodded, then started sobbing. Yeah. There is. It turns out my name is not Tenten. I am actually Orange Blossom of the Mantis. I'm a clan heiress just like Hinata-chan here. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she admitted, I have a mother. And a father. I even have siblings. A couple of younger brothers and sisters who were raised hearing stories about me. I got my name from my mother's favorite flower, a tree that grows in our clan's backyard, kept alive for her at great expense because my father loves her so much. They just took me to look at it. The girl collapsed in Hinata's arms and began sobbing. That bombshell just kind of took everyone by surprise. Ino rushed forward to perform a mind-body switch, checking out the other girl's mind. When she emerged, she shook herself, and gazed at her sobbing friend kindly. But it can't be. We checked, right? Yugao asked, seeing Hinata was too busy comforting the other girl to mention it. Ino drew in a deep breath and released it slowly, on the verge of sympathetic tears herself. Quickly she shook her head. Not well enough, as it turns out. I would have caught anything she was conscious of, but Tenten had forgotten it all herself, and it was so deeply buried in the background clutter that I never noticed. Poor girl. A deep cover agent who got lost? Kin wondered aloud, looking at the adults. Yugao tensed, but Anko subtly waved her down, shaking her head. Seeing the ANBU sore mistress still holding herself ready, the special scooted over to grab her and whisper in her ear. Now you just think for a minute. Here we have a girl who's been with us for years admitting to us she had a past she never knew of. That's not the action of someone more loyal to another than to us. The poor girl is just as shocked by the revelation as we are, and is more concerned we'll reject her based on this than we are that she'll betray us. On Yugao's other side, Tsunade nodded soberly, even as Shizen added herself to the group hug around Tenten. And what could she do? We are in a set of time loops. All of us are constrained by the fact that none of us can form, or maintain, meaningful relationships with people who aren't aware that time keeps getting reset around us. Besides, Anko murmured softly to avoid her voice carrying over to any of the kids. Ino was just inside her head, and I can assure you I trained that little brat better than to not check for illusions or compulsions or junk like that after a revelation like this. Ino gave no warning, so she's clean. None of her love for Naruto, or for us, is feigned, Hana added to this covert little huddled discussion among the adults, scratching her nose to subtly indicate that extremely keen sense of hers. All her loyalty is still to us. She's just afraid she'll lose us, that we'll reject her. Which we have no reason to, Tsunade insisted, acting as she rarely did as the chief among Naruto's wives. We're not going to. Naruto appeared behind them to add his own hot insistence to this affair. The appearance of Naruto served as a catalyst. Once reassured that he still loved her just as much as he ever did, the dam burst in Tenten, or Orange Blossom if you prefer, wanted to tell them all about the life she'd forgotten. Sharing was part of healing, and once reassured of their love for her, and the relationships they had with her staying intact, she did so with gusto. Would you believe I was a prodigy? The girl asked them, clearing some of the tears out of her eyes and starting to smile. I graduated from the Suna Ninja Academy at the age of 5, and was an acknowledged wind mistress, and at 6. My family was so proud of me. I'd mastered all of our clan techniques by then, and carried a fan my mother made for me. It's lovely. I wish I could show it to you, but my clone is still getting reintroduced to them, and it's with them. I could show you later. But anyway, my dad objected to one of the Kazakh's policies, killing Gaara actually, and he thought to humble us by sentencing me to deep cover. Tenten, still wiping tears out of her eyes, fighting urges to laugh or chuckle or cry some more, she didn't know what, took a deep breath and plunged on. They sent me to Hidden Rock first, but I got found out. Dad was able to extract me anyway, and after the Kazakage refused to let me back I got reassigned to Konoha. One anonymous orphanage caught fire later, and a whole load of QB orphans got reassigned to other orphanages while the first one got rebuilt, and I was just included among them. Hinata was nodding. I can see how that could be effective. Most of the records would have been lost, and with the children dispersed they wouldn't all recognize each other. Tenten was nodding. And I was so determined not to get caught this time that I submerged all of my skills so deeply I forgot I even had them. Then I went and forgot my family, and… Seeing the girl was threatening to break down into sobs again, Naruto picked her up and shouted gladly. Hey! This means I finally get in-laws out of you. Come on, everybody. Let's go meet them. Hooray! The group cheered. His enthusiasm was catching. You have 2 families now, Hinata reassured the girl. Not unusual when a girl gets married, Anko allowed, deliberately casual. I hope I can like them as much as we love you, Kin added her support. Tenten was beaming at all this acceptance. Just remember, Tsunade reassured Yugao as the two followed along, trailing just a touch behind the rest of the group and speaking softly. What the usual situation would be here is a confused former agent having to decide who she is more loyal to, in other words, which relationship matters the most to her, and we are in a set of time loops. Remember what that does. And Yugao did, and it reassured her tremendously. Her budding relationship with a boy outside the loops could not survive her progressing as a ninja and a person, while he did not. In a choice between a relationship that grew and flourished, and which was already well established, versus a tentative and new one that could not change or grow, Tenten would inevitably select the growing one. Therefore, she was safe, and could be trusted. On reaching that conclusion, the ANBU's fears relaxed concerning her. First, I would like to blow a raspberry on Hawk's fanfiction forum. For if they'd had their way, this story never would have completed its first chapter. And they continue to sneer at it to this day. I ask only that someday the universe return that karma to their own heads. Naruto stood grinning out in the desert. A clone popped. That was the signal. 1,000 Narutos arranged in a huge circle all cried out together, "Rose Rampart!" A huge wall began to rise between the clones from their circle, curling inward to rise as a dome. However, the wall cracked as it was rising, dropping huge, multi-ton blocks of stone while collapsing in on itself. Splashing rubble popped many of the clones that had been forming it. As dust plumed skyward, the real Naruto, who was up on a ridge watching the whole affair, sighed and palmed his forehead. Third failure so far, a nearby clone bearing a clipboard and with a pencil shoved behind his ear remarked unnecessarily. Then, just to keep talking as it knew the original already had this information, it said, "Sand keeps shifting under the base. Apparently the new supports you designed aren't going to compensate enough." The real Naruto sighed, nodding. But talking to himself did help to review the data and get new ideas, which was why he still did it. Suddenly galvanized, he shot straight up and ordered, "Send down clones as deep as they can dive on underground move jutsu. See how deep this sand goes. If we can't build on sand, we may have to use bedrock for our foundation." Right. The clone formed a hand seal and another 2,000 Narutos went about clearing away rubble and following those newest orders. The clone with the clipboard starts doing calculations with his pencil. As big as this will be, we still won't be able to keep most of the dome from being underground. This sand is like water. No matter how deep a hole we dig, it will just fill it up again. With the way wind blows in this country, the sands shift constantly, and according to our first reports, it is almost as deep as we planned for this dome to be tall. It would take major engineering to make it any taller, and then it would have to hold up not only its own weight, but all of the sand pressed up against it. Well, the point of this whole experiment was to see if we could build a dome out of polarized rock over Suna to cut down incoming sunlight. The real boy proclaimed. Being partly underground might just help us do that. Clear a hole. Let's give this new plan a try. Yes, sir, the clone replied. Shovels? The real Naruto scowled. All right. Let's go seek out Temari and see if she can't teach us those street sweeping exercises she's got. You're right. There's no practical way to clear off enough bedrock to work on otherwise. You want what? Tsunade repeated dumbly. Naruto's other wives would be giggling madly. It wasn't often, especially in these resets, where you could catch the legendary slug Sannin by surprise, if they weren't all staring dumbly themselves. It would be our honor, the Sand Councilman repeated, standing at the head of the entire Suna Ninja Council, to receive you as our Kazekage. Seeing her continue to stare at him blankly, he stumbled, that is, if you will accept the post. Once more he offered her the conical hat with the symbol for wind on it. Baki coughed into his fist. As the most powerful shinobi currently active in the ranks of Hidden Sand, due to your recent return from your deep cover post, you are of course first choice for the position. And it was you and your undercover team who discovered our last Kazekage was assassinated, a third councilman stated. We feel it only right that you, arguably the person most suited to defending the position of Kazekage from another attempt by your old teammate to infiltrate it, should have the job. What's the salary of this position? Shizen shoved forward to ask. Dark clouds hung around her teacher as she did so. The Sannin had long since come to accept the more or less permanent freedom from her debts as one of the best parts of these resets. But apparently her apprentice still kept them in mind. Well, Sand is not a rich village, the chief councilman hedged. But perhaps you would find secrets from the village's jutsu library for some compensation? She accepts. Naruto appeared to shout in unison with all his angels. Good, Baki and the Sand Council beamed as Naruto put the hat on his wife's unresisting, but still unhappy head. As my first order, the Sannin growled, grabbing Naruto by the throat. I appoint Naruto here chief geriatric practitioner of Hidden Sand. There came much giggling from the wives as Naruto blanched. And the rest of these girls are his subordinates, Tsunade finished coldly. I've trained them all very well. So bring out all your old people. They're going to give them checkups right now. Nuh! The cries of anguished souls rang out. That was cruel and unusual punishment, Temari groaned, burying her face in the water they brought along for a personal hot spring. Wrinkled B, bodies. Naruto shivered. Nor was he alone in his grimacing and shivering, the entire clan had been hid deep in ugly old people all afternoon. It was not a happy sight. So I was fascinated by that case you had with the osteoporosis patient who took well to the treatments, Ino told Shizen brightly. The Sannin's first apprentice smiled. Yes, degenerative conditions like that one are the hardest to heal, and you see them all the time in the elderly. I wish it were as simple to fix as a kunai injury, but sometimes all you can do is heal the breaks and smooth over past damage, and hope that it gives it enough strength not to break as easily the next time. You can't just strengthen or replace the bones? Tayuya asked, curious. Good heavens, no! Shizen chuckled throatily. Do you know how much I would give to be able to do that for patients? We can patch them together with medical chakra, but you can't draw on resources that don't exist. Cells replace and divide naturally, so it isn't all that hard to encourage them to grow, but if their bones are failing, they often don't have the necessary bits to rebuild them. The body sees the bones as its emergency calcium storage and takes some out when it needs to, but putting it back in is the hard part. As you grow older, it gets harder to absorb nutrients like that, so they just aren't floating around in the bloodstream to add back in, even if you could. So it's just part of growing old, your bones and body get frailer. Tayuya wondered. I know a guy in Sound who can grow his bones out and use them as armor or weapons. Are you telling me it's not a technique? Has to be a bloodline, Shizen told her. Those break all sorts of rules. But as far as medical techniques go, that's out. It's not even an option. Finished scrubbing up, the red-haired from Sound got up and headed to the pool for a soak. Well, I think I've found my medical project then. I'll make it a point to study that guy. Perhaps I can learn something. It would do a lot to aid the elderly. Shizen joined her. All sorts of things wear out, skin, organs, and so on, but bones are one of the most crucial. You could always keep muscles fit if you weren't concerned about breaking your bones doing it. Well, there's also heart failure and things, but we can restart those. Shizen mused, then shrugged happily. No, if there was a way to solve the bone problem, countless older shinobi would not be so helpless. It's something to look into then. Tayuya pulled out her flute and played a few notes, creating a chakra puppet that began to rub her down. Where her old ones were all deformed and demonic looking, hoping to inspire terror, or at least some revulsion, in combat, lately she had taken to experimenting. This one was tall, blue-skinned, and looked like a female genie, much more comfortable to have around, and somehow appropriate as a servant in the relaxed and sumptuous setting of their baths. So, you make it sound like ninja don't have any advantages at all. Tenten observed Kurenai among the younger wives as they were all washing up after a marathon medical session she was trying hard not to remember, giving checkups and examinations to every gray hair and sand, interrupting the talk about bones that kept reminding her of it. Dealing with samurai, I mean. Not at all. Hana quipped on her behalf, also sudsing up. Ninjas are tricksy. Pushing chakra out of our bodies allows us to do things no samurai or monk could attempt. None of them could walk on walls, and only water monks could walk on water. Only ninja can disguise themselves or vanish in a puff of smoke to reappear elsewhere, and no samurai or monk can make clones or control puppets. Illusions are also our specialty, and while those don't fool armored samurai, they can be used to deceive monks who, being unarmored, can also be taken down by a handful of thrown saban or kunai if done correctly. Eager for the subject change, Anko and Kurenai also joined in, with the former teacher taking the lead. We also make heavy use of storage scrolls, when neither other branch does. Monks are actually quite good at seals, but don't go anywhere and have taken vows of poverty, so moving lots of things about is not one of their priorities. And while samurai might be interested, they are too busy with other things. You can't be good at everything, and they have administrative duties to consider. So you won't find many among them who have any skill at seals. They rely on monks and ninjas for that. As Kurenai rinsed off, she tossed an "Are you paying attention?" glare to the young girls. As a consequence, neither of the other militaries are as adept at summons as we are. They have a few, but not many. Samurai are too ignorant of the sealing art, and monks don't get enough practice with the small stuff or express chakra, so must do it in groups if they do it at all. Anko was grinning privately now as she shampooed her hair. Also, we have a permit or license, so to speak, to behave in ways others find dishonorable, like in the use of poisons. We find nothing wrong with that, but neither other military would use any. The same goes for traps. Tricking a samurai to rush after you, break through a thin ground cover and fall into a deep pit, and then collapse on him is one of the best ways of dealing with them, but they think that sort of stuff is terribly unfair. Just like making them chase puppets or clones across the countryside, Kin joined this conversation long enough to snigger. A simple clone, whether an illusionary one or made out of some material, is its own chakra construct anchored to itself. So it can't be dispelled the way a hell viewing technique could, and it is one of the few illusions a samurai's chakra armor doesn't protect them from. Not until they touch and dispel it, anyway. One of the reasons it gets taught to everyone as a basic technique, Anko agreed. The basic three are all like that. Transformation anchors its illusion to your chakra, not the samurai's, so again they aren't protected unless they actually touch you. And they can't kill you if they can't find you, which annoys them to no end. She smiled, then waved a soapy finger at the younger kunoichi. No one is as flexible as a ninja, except another ninja. We acknowledge no rules governing our behavior except a cavalier whatever works attitude and loyalty to our village. Unlike monks, we'll often use techniques from whatever elements we can get our hands on, and no one else uses any stealth, even if I must admit we've gotten fairly lax in that ourselves lately. But the next time a real war crops up, you'd better believe we'll pick that up again in short order, and once again be the ghosts of the battlefield. Also, during real war samurai must be campaigning in the field, which means they don't all get to sleep in those wonderful chakra-stealing stone castles of theirs, which puts us back in the business of killing them in their sleep. Hana agreed, sinking down into the tub with the rest of the women already there. Ninja are the go-anywhere, do-anything force. Both of the others are too uptight to do anything about, say, a rice shortage or stolen necklace. The samurai will tell a merchant to solve the rice problem, and monks don't care about anything outside their own monastery walls. Monks care mostly about the heavens and things not of this world, while samurai govern the day-to-day living. That leaves us with everything else, all the in-between stuff. Like pushing ships, Temari added, relaxing into the soak and glad for the subject change from the earlier medical one. Samurai can't, and monks do not care about money and wouldn't want to cheapen themselves to such a mercenary role anyway. They want to be left alone to deal with heavenly things, not be shackled to a boat to run cargo. Kurenai was nodding. One of our strengths as ninjas is our willingness to do practically anything. No monk would cheapen himself to become a glorified mule pushing ships about to ferry people back and forth on a lord's beck and call. Just as no samurai would permit himself to be harnessed like an ox to plow fields. He may be that strong, but he'd rather starve. Monks and samurai do not hire themselves out to perform missions. Ninja do. Hana agreed. Often we are the only recourse of the common folk who want something done they are unable to do themselves. And not just for the common folk, our traveling ten, the camping techniques you all know? Well, samurai hire us as camp followers during war just to keep their armies more mobile and flexible by lighting all their campfires for them, washing all their pots, and recharging batteries for any tech they use. Not glamorous, Kurenai joined them in the soak, but the best place to put newly minted genin who don't know anything better and are still too raw to risk in combat. I was glad to do it in the last real war. They were graduating us so fast we were still too young to have any real muscles. Better to wash dishes and live than face someone 4 times your strength, size and speed, and who has 10 times your experience, and die. You grew up into an illusion mistress because you later had to fight and had not developed the muscles, right? Hinata asked softly, and Kurenai nodded. Another reason destructive jutsu are popular, Enko added. In most wars we don't have to fight samurai, they'll take care of themselves. Samurai are all too eager to slaughter enemy samurai in the great big wars of theirs. Our job is to handle the enemy ninja that might want to poison a samurai army's food supplies, blow up a bridge they may be crossing, or slip a pretty kunoichi between a commander's sheets to stab him during a romantic moment, or, worse still, stay with him smiling sweetly while every night copying all of his organization and planning documents to send to her own side. Scouting is an essential function in all combat. Hana sighed, stretching as she enjoyed the hot pool. If you don't scout, you don't learn the terrain or the enemy's strength and disposition. In short, you lose. And you can scout in 2 general ways: send out a lot of ninja to hopefully slip past the enemy ninja on guard to see the enemy camp and count his numbers, or use spies to copy that information out of their own tables of organization. A kunoichi in a commander's bed is one of the most successful scouts ever invented. But coming back to the force comparisons in event of a conflict, Taiya lectured, coming into this conversation herself. Other advantages of ninja are, due to our summoning expertise, we own and use more technology than either other force does. We carefully cultivate our special bloodlines, which the celibate monks can't, and samurai are too noble to marry a peasant girl just because she can manifest ice. Also, none of the others are as good at medicine, because that requires express chakra and they don't have our skill in that, although some monks do try, and a couple get almost as good. Enko was grinning as she tilted back a cup. Also, one of our trademarks is to vanish before a deadly blow only to get replaced by a block of wood which they hate, and neither of the other forces do. She smirked nastily. They always get so angry when we do it fighting them, like we are cheating them out of their just rewards right when they've earned a kill on us. That might even be true by their standards, but we are ninja, whatever works, we'll do. Temari groaned as Taiya's genie Masus went to work on her. Not as good as Naruto, but then nothing was. And the special defenses of hidden sand do apply. They cannot see through sandstorms, like we do. Nor can they prevent the grit from touching them, again as we do. Monks and samurai don't get our sunblock or sand stride techniques, so get to bake out their slogging through hip-deep dunes also. Indirect damage from ninjutsu can still happen. So wind jutsu can make a sandstorm, blowing up dust and grit that destroys samurai, choking and burying them. Suna is actually the village best defended against their own government, which just may be a factor in why our daimyo doesn't trust us at all. She looked up to see their faces. Doesn't help us a bit if we get declared in rebellion and the wind monks get called down against us, but it does cut down on official inspections. Hana gave a throaty chuckle. And of course, everyone has always relied on us as spies. Even Konoha, who takes last place in the intelligence contests between major villages, gives their daimyo regular reports, and he doesn't know those reports aren't top rate. Enko chuckled throatily, leaning back and at rest. Not even the top villages give their best information to their daimyos. Stupid nobles have the worst senses of what to blurt out in public gatherings. A careless comment meant as a show of look what I could do to you if I wanted to cow another lord into submission has often led to the deaths of entire intelligence cells. So the ones with the really good intel don't share it, especially not with their lords. So it's not like the Fire Lord knows he is missing anything. His competitors are no better off than he is with regards to the intel reports they get. Enko turned to face Naruto, whose shivering in revulsion had subsided due to the distracting topic of ninja combat and tactics. Good. It was serving its purpose then. Hey kid, do you know that lecture I gave you long ago about how tools are the most underutilized and appreciated ninja skill? Well, here's another use for them. Tools work just as well on samurai as they do on anyone else. You can wrap them up with wire, assuming you do it so their swords don't cut it. You can poison them, use gas grenades to blind or choke them, trick them into fighting your puppets, or do anything you'd normally do to someone with a tool. Our fancy chakra tricks don't hurt them, but tools work just fine. Except for explosive tags, Kurenai reminded. The blast is chakra-based, so it doesn't hurt them. Okay, Anko admitted, leaning back and getting comfortable. Except for them unless you get tricky with them. She grinned wickedly. Because they know they are immune to the tags, samurai often charge right into them, or ignore the explosions altogether. So, if you place a bunch of kunai in front of a tag before it goes off, that explosion drives the kunai, and your target gets peppered by knives under cover of the explosion. He might be immune to the explosion, but not the kunai driven by it, and the kunai doesn't care where it got its momentum from. Hana scowled. Sounds simple, but that sort of trap is difficult to arrange. Getting the aim right so you don't shred everything in range is the hard part. And missing a trap like that when you're depending on it is no fun at all. Tenten scowled. Now you're making it sound like it's the samurai that don't stand any chance. There came a moment of silence before Kurenai sighed, drooping her head. That's not the impression we meant to give at all. Anko, who was frowning, was also nodding along with Kurenai's denial. If you know all of the tricks it can turn out differently, but most ninja, if they fight against most samurai, will result in the ninja being killed. It's the way we're taught to fight. Hana agreed, waving an idle gesture. Think of most of the clans you know of. Who are the big heavy hitters in Konoha right now? The Hyuga tops the list at the moment. So say an average Hyuga fights a samurai. The Hyuga turns his eyes on, big deal, the samurai wasn't hiding and doesn't use any illusions. So no advantage. Next the Hyuga uses his clan's gentle fist on him, but the express chakra necessary to block up the samurai's chakra coils gets stopped and absorbed by his armor, so it doesn't do any damage. Then the samurai swung. Say this Hyuga knows their heavenly spin defense. He uses it, except the chakra emitted from all over his body is met by a sword that was created for the purpose of cutting through chakra barriers and does it all the time. End result, dead Hyuga. Take a step back and say it was an Uchiha. Kurenai added an example of her own to help illustrate the point. Against other ninjas an Uchiha is lethal, but think of what happens against a samurai. The Sharingan uses chakra sight to predict movements and copy techniques, only the samurai uses all internal chakra, which all by itself puts a damper on things. We've all used it. With a Sharingan, express chakra is easy to see. It's like watching a pro gambler try to cheat on a deal when you can see the faces on all of his cards. A child can do it. But turn that around, so all you can see are the backs of his deck, and it becomes much harder. Now that takes real work and effort, it doesn't come automatically anymore, and most people are too lazy to learn how to do it the hard way. But even if they did, those little clues that would otherwise be visible to the copy will eye aren't there because of the armor getting in the way, absorbing all of the chakra it can reach in order to express its own chakra shield. They've tried this before and no member of the Uchiha clan has ever been able to use their bloodline against a samurai successfully. There's just too few cues to notice in the first place, and shielded too well from the interference generated by the dual functions of the armor. So an Uchiha can't predict or copy from him, and the illusions that I might cast are once again useless on a samurai, who can stare him right in the eye and fear nothing. End result, dead Uchiha, Hana concluded for her friend. They grow to rely so much on that bloodline of theirs that, deprived of it, you'll find their other skills have all rotted. But even if they hadn't, once you've close to combat range with a samurai, even jutsu flinging range, he's faster than you are and will charge and charge and charge until he's close to sword range. Getting away once you've joined combat is not as simple as you'd think. Body flicker doesn't take you nearly far enough to escape, unless you're an expert at it. And if he gets close enough it won't work at all. Nothing will, as his armor will absorb all the chakra you try to use, which is an ugly surprise to find in the middle of a deadly combat. Even forewarned, most ninja just aren't prepared to fight against a samurai, and don't survive their initial encounter. The Inuzuka heiress then sighed. Even Kiba, one of the best young ninja of our village and someone I'd put up against most members of any other hidden village, look how he'd do up against a samurai. Right off he'd start with beast mimicry for a boost of extra speed and power. But the moment he got close and really needed it, it would desert him, sucked down to fuel the chakra shield of the samurai's armor. Then, if he survived that initial brush, he'd use something like piercing fang, leaping head first toward his foe and launching into a spin that would normally rip an opponent to shreds. But the moment he gets within range, the chakra that makes him a powerful drill able to shred men or walls with ease just goes away, and all he ends up with is a clumsy head but on an armored enemy, not a way to win a fight. All of these are very powerful ninja, Anko emphasized. Up against another ninja they do very well. Against a samurai? Poorly. The strategies that work very well on other ninja are the wrong way to approach fighting against a samurai. Tenten, as she was before the resets, was a regrettably feeble ninja compared to most in the Chunin exam, yet she'd do better than most of them. Her strategy of standing off at range and peppering a target with thrown weapons is actually not a bad way to fight a samurai. Not the best. It won't work until he runs out of chakra and his shield collapses, but it won't get you killed the same way rushing into close combat would. And the fact that she'd not be wasting her chakra on high-power assault jutsu means she saves what she has for body flicker and replacement technique escapes, transformations to hide from him, and clones to draw him off. So she might actually survive a fight long enough to wear him down. Hana was nodding. What it boils down to is that the brute force approach adopted by most ninjas lately simply doesn't work against our feudal lords. Samurai are too well protected from most of our techniques, and too good at their own specialty, to beat head-on in face-to-face combat. If you want to beat one, you've got to be tricky. There's no other way of doing it. Shizen giggled. The silly thing is, most monks are retired samurai. So if it came down to it, most monks could beat most samurai because they already know the other's tricks. But monks don't have the fancy armor or weapons that make them so deadly to us. So it comes out as a game of rock, paper, scissors. Ninja beats monk, monk beats samurai, and samurai beats ninja. Again, it's not true all of the time, but in 90% of the cases it is. Anko leaned back against the wall of the bath and sighed as the heat from the water went to work on her muscles. But as they all report to the daimyo, if any one faction gets out of line, the ruler of that country has another resource that can beat it, Hana finished. Tsunade cackled. She couldn't help it. She just had the most excellent and evil plan ever. As Kazekage, leader of Suna, the village hidden in the sands, she had a whole slew of powerful ninja under her command. And Shizen had just reminded her of all those debts that had been pursuing her over the years. Well, Suna was not a rich village. She'd never pay those gambling debts off if she lived there. There was just no way. The entire village didn't make enough money to do that. She'd end up forced at some point to part with her family necklace in order to pay off those loan sharks. However, the Kitsune clan had a fair amount of money. Not enough to pay off the kind of debts her gambling had brought into being, but Naruto had become so excellently skilled a craftsman that there was little that he couldn't make, and most of what he did others would pay a small fortune for. And now some of the others in the clan were following in those footsteps. Even taking on his wives as apprentices and farming out work to clones, it would be an unusual burden trying to pay off Tsunade's debts. They were magnificent in an oddly surreal and pathetic way. But most of the clan didn't feel like being enslaved to the prospect of work till you drop for a few years in order to pay for Tsunade's drunken binges and gambling losses. On the other hand, Tsunade was now Kazekage, with a whole village full of ninja under her command. Recently reminded of her debts, and nothing to distract her from dealing with the problem, she had come up with her most excellent and evil plan. She assigned a few A-rank missions to Sand Ninja to go out there and erase those debts, either by destroying the paperwork, or silencing the loan sharks and crime lords that held them, or both. It was elegant, simple, and perfect. It got Suna a little richer by having those missions. Some of their better ninjas got a chance not only to earn good pay but to go out into the world and use their skills in a practical environment, gaining valuable experience. Loan sharks kept stables of missing ninja as bodyguards, but nothing that could stop large teams of, and the sand teams could collect the bounties on those missing ninja at the same time as neutralizing the crime lords. Better still, the cost of those few A-rank missions was low enough compared to the real debts, that Clan Kitsune would happily cover them for her. She didn't even have to use the village's operation budget. Tsunade tilted the Kazekage hat to the back of her head and laughed. Now if only there was some sake around this place. Sigh. Oh yeah? No drinking in hidden sand? It wastes water and has a stigma because of that. Groan. The kid would probably try to use this chance to get her to quit. He'd been quietly disapproving of her drunken binges for years. And Shizen, the traitor, would certainly help him. Tsunade was partly planning missions for secret sake smuggling when the idea came across that maybe this power was going to her head. Nah. The Mantis clan were something amazing. Even more amazing to the Kitsune clan was how readily the people of Mantis accepted them. Tenten, aka Orange Blossom, aka Mikanohana, Mikan for short, considered them as family, and amazingly enough, that was good enough for the Mantis. To Tenten this was an entirely new experience. She'd never had her opinion pull that kind of weight before. Ninja clans were engaged in a constant series of tests and deceptions against each other. Trust was one of those things they could least afford to share freely, and was their most heavily guarded commodity, bar none. Most ninja gradually grew to trust fewer and fewer people until they were paranoid wrecks who couldn't trust anyone at all, and those who reached that state burned out rather quickly. One of the many hazards of the profession. But while there were hints of an underlying caution, truly, she'd be more upset if there wasn't. The Mantis as a whole were perfectly willing to roll out the fine china and treat her Kitsune clan family as visiting relations. All on her say-so. It was frankly a little terrifying to poor Tenten to have anyone trust her opinion that much, but it gave her a whole different perspective on what she meant to her birth family, and the Mantis clan generally. The girl couldn't make up her mind whether to be a sobbing wreck crying tears of joy or a nervous one trying to deserve their high opinions of her. She needn't have worried. Her experience during these resets had given her a skill set that was frankly astounding. She'd already been quite a remarkable thrown weapons mistress, and in some ways it was to be expected for her to be a little rusty on all of this Suna and Mantis clan stuff. She had been an undercover agent for half her life, now. And when she'd gone quiet there were unavoidable rumors of her going native, as so many others had done before her. That was just part of the costs of doing business in the intelligence department. But her family had truly mourned her passing as she'd gotten lost. Now they had her back, they were every bit as enthusiastic as though she'd been returned from the dead. They were even holding an extravagant party in her honor. Now, Tenten had had a few parties before, but they were all small-scale affairs, namely what an orphan with only a few friends could afford. The scale of the shindig the Mantis was holding, on the other hand, was the sort associated with what clans passed for a ninja village's royalty. Of course, she'd been to these before, even had a few thrown in her honor, but that was all back before she'd turned 7 and gotten assigned to deep cover as a way to punish her father for objecting to trying to kill Gaara. Not the sort of stuff that sticks in your memory strongly literally half a lifetime later, when everything associated with it had already been forgotten. But it was glorious as she experienced it now. In truth, it was not so new to her even so. One of Naruto's frequent parties would, in many ways, surpass even this. That boy had a positive flair for entertainment that never grew tiring. But she knew Naruto loved her, knew it with that same soul-deep certainty that a person knows they exist. It was a priceless treasure, and yet it made her feel a whole different kind of love to see and feel and hear others expressing that to her also. The best diamond in the world is not diminished by also having the best sapphire. She could be loved by Naruto and her birth family now. There simply was no better state of existence she could imagine. Naruto had been aware from his earliest days of learning craft skills that he did not, even after obsessive experimentation, know it all. There were clans of masters who'd carefully cultivated their art over generations, and after centuries had discovered secrets they shared with no one. The boy from Konoha did not have access to all of the environments or materials, so could not play with everything. Nor could he think of everything by himself. His imagination, great as it was, still had limits that could not encompass every lucky break or discovery made by thousands of minds across generations. Mantis was one of those clans of masters that had been smiths for a very long time, and had an interest in learning the smithing secrets and techniques of others. Also, being ninja, they had some ability to steal those techniques for their own use, and more than sufficient reason to do so, as it made their own armaments that much more effective, thus enabling them to live longer. As a direct result, they were among the best smithing clans of Hidden Sand, which was itself a country famous for its blacksmiths, and being a military village, their best weapons or armor was something they'd never export. Mantis tools and arms were simply extraordinary. Few could equal them. Most clans, even most villages, didn't even come close. And that was a big part of why they were more than slightly interested in the Kitsune clan's armor and weapons, specifically the techniques with which they made them. Naruto had by sheer blunt force of incessant practice and experimentation discovered things they did not know. And they had a lot to share in return. There came a delicate, even discreet, offer of potential negotiations, seeing as how they were now all family through Tenten. This was, of necessity, a very genteel sort of probe as no one shares their best secrets casually, and the clans didn't know each other. Their only link was through Tenten, and to expect a tentative ally like that one to start gushing secrets was unheard of. Well, unheard of to those who don't know Naruto. What? The boy exclaimed, once the Mantis representative, Tenten's mom, actually, had finally gotten out a hint blunt enough for him to catch. You want to know how I make this stuff? He rapped his breastplate with a silver gauntlet finger. His bluntness over such a gentle probe horrified the woman. I'm so very sorry. I didn't mean. Well, sure. The blonde bounced, bubbling as he took her hand and started to drag her in the general direction of where he half thought he remembered their smithies were. Come on, let me show you. Do you need to change out of those party clothes first? The poor woman's jaw was hanging free at the moment. Fortunately, the clan head, her husband, came up and rescued her, taking his wife's side and confronting the boy's declaration with a bluntness to match his own. You mean you'd share the kitsune's smithing techniques as easily as that? He clarified because that statement was unbelievable to the man. They'd fought wars over lesser smithing techniques than these. Naruto stared at the man like he'd grown a third head, before narrowing his eyes. Easy? No. But I'd die for Tenten. Mikanohana Amikan, do you mind if I just keep calling her Tenten? That's the name I've always known her by. It's the name we married under. The girl's father indicated his assent. No, that's all right. She's worn that name for half her life now. I can see her becoming attached to it. I can make it an official middle name for her, if you like. Thanks, Naruto posed, pointing a finger at the older gentleman from Sand. Now, as for techniques, she is my wife. So I am your son. We are family. And family helps each other. I'll teach you everything I know. And will naturally do the same, Tenten's mother promised, bowing her head to hide her crying. This child loved her daughter so well. The girl's father swallowed. That boy had just made a pledge of allegiance that was impossible to ignore. According to him, they were not two clans related by a single marriage, they were one clan. It was impossible to get any closer than he declared they already were. And seeing as he'd brought their missing Mikanohana back to them and promised them a wealth of new information and techniques besides. The clan head of Mantis reached out and carefully drew Naruto into a hug. Welcome home, son. Naruto's childhood was a complete failure in any way you look at it. Everyone involved failed. The fourth didn't leave him any money or protection, didn't set him up with a new family, did not order anyone to take care of him, etc. He could have just as easily been slipped into a devastated family as declared an orphan. In fact, it would have hidden him much better to be just another Inuzuka, or whatever, than to have an unexplained past people might pry into. Then the third thought it to be a really great idea to let the S-ranked secret of his being the container out to a bunch of civilians. Even if they didn't hate the boy, wouldn't it make just as many enemies worldwide if it was known he was a potential superweapon, demon container as it would if it was known he was the fourth son? Nothing about that choice made any sense. Then we had the fact that Naruto was already under assassination attempts by his own village. How could revealing his father hurt him more? If anything, it'd be safer to have your enemies trying to kill you than your own guards that are trusted to protect the boy making the attempts on his life. If Naruto hadn't had the gift of regeneration, he wouldn't have lived to the age of 4. Dying before 2 was far more likely, as one civilian, or another, slipped poison into his bottle of milk. No, you'd have to be a real moron to try and raise a kid that way. There wasn't much that could have been done worse to make his situation more unbearable. Wild animals could literally have raised him better. For him to have turned out anywhere near normal was nothing less than a miracle. So it was that when the Mantis accepted him, well, the poor boy was no longer the attention-starved mess he had once been. Nor was he the skill-less loser no one had once bothered to train in anything. But it was also very different from his previous experiences to be accepted and loved by anything even vaguely resembling parents. Even the older women who'd accepted him had generally done so under the aegis of snuggle bunnies than stern go-do-your-chores maternal types, and it was a different equation. Even the den mother slot was different, as the one holding it never had any illusions as to who was actually in charge. Tenten's mom and dad were good parents. They cared about doing a good job, were good people generally, and had succeeded in raising a whole flock of well-adjusted kids in the messed-up environment of Suna, and in spite of them having the messed-up job of being ninja. Only the Inuzuka clan had treated him with anywhere near the same level of kindness, and even then they'd had to overcome their own prejudices and barriers to do so. There had also been some of that pack-oriented feeling coloring things. So, as the boy was very much an alpha, there was little in the way of kindly looking after, guiding, or instructing. He was an alpha. Here, with the mantis, he was simply their son. And if he needed to be told to go wash behind his ears, he got told to go wash behind his ears. And yes, you may have fought S-class missing ninja to a standstill, but you still need to finish your vegetables if you are to grow up healthy and strong. All of Kitsune began to breathe a sigh of relief as the Mantis clan stepped in and started doing what no one else had, providing good parental role models and a spot of stability in Naruto's life. Suddenly he was awash in aunts and uncles, cousins and younger siblings inherited from having stepped in with Tenten to fill her former place. And the situation could not be doing anything better for either one of the family-starved young ninja. It was like water to both of them, suddenly quenching an old thirst. At the same time, the Kitsune clan, or their clones, were getting ready to go on their first water runs. Naruto had learned, several times, that often the small lessons taught as much as the larger ones. Sometimes more. Water runs might not have been a great challenge to their combat abilities, nor were they strangers to other countries, but Temari was right in that they taught desert navigation better than anything else. And well, they'd be working in the desert for a while. It was good to know how to travel and survive out in one. Besides, they really expected it to add a level of polish to those Suna chakra control exercises they'd all been learning. Kenkuro was even enjoying himself as he took the team lead position for the trip. You know how we've been bragging about our typical ninja's chakra control in Suna? Well, here is one example. On a typical water run we must cross dozens of miles of desert holding up not one but two different chakra control techniques. We've got Sandstride to move fast, but you've also got to maintain sunblock or you'll fry. Lose hold on either one and that stops or slows us down. Oh, and if a storm crops up you'll get to maintain not two, but four different chakra techniques as we use Sandsight and Stormwalker techniques also. So you ready? Let's go! Naruto had, through the use of stealth and guile, taught himself martial arts equal to the best Ninja Academy students, placing himself firmly among the top rookie genin for skill. He'd even been forced to teach himself to top genin level twice, as the acquisition of his bloodline had thrown all of his memorized patterns for those body skills completely out of whack. Then he'd been held back by only having his mind know those moves, but having later copied those skills into reflex memories using a stolen Sharingan, he'd doubled his ability at using them. That put him squarely where a rookie ought to be. And while that was good, it had not been enough for the ambitious lad. So he'd implemented his plan for disguising himself as Sasuke to get some of the better combat teachers of Konoha to train him further. That had capped out at about mid-chunin level of martial arts. The reason why the new limit was simple: his body conditioning, with the exception of unreal stamina, was at the level of an average academy student despite the boost in physical abilities he got through his bloodline, and couldn't keep up with the demands placed on it for operating at the higher levels. Naruto had even practiced and trained for a few weeks during the wait between the second and final exam, getting himself in better physical shape before approaching those special teachers. And while it had helped, it couldn't lift him further than he was now. He'd played that card for all it was worth. So the young lad had, once more, run into a ceiling on his martial art abilities. It didn't disturb him as much this time. For one, he'd already had to suffer through the disappointment of being blocked and cheated once, so the limit did not seem as real or as absolute this time as it had initially. For another, his skills were now much higher, and it was easier to be at peace with them being closer to the desired range. Genin level martial arts were a weakness, whereas level 1s were merely not much of a strength. Besides, the real obstacles of not having proper instruction were no longer the limiters they once were, as once more he'd studied beyond his body's ability to keep up. So now if the resets were to end suddenly, he would not be stuck looking for teachers, and unable to use his best tricks on them for fear of being caught, and no resets to pull him out of trouble. No, all he really had to do now was get himself in much better physical shape, something he'd already learned how to do under Guy, and his close combat skills would rise on their own to the top range. Top was not nearly so much of a disappointment as top rookie genin. Many had lapsed to or not studied their martial arts beyond that level. It was an acceptable standard if they could compensate with other strengths. Most ninja were specialists, because it paid off better to be really amazingly good at one thing, so long as it could overcome your opponents, than to be mediocre in several. It was also easier to train several specialists than one generalist. That made for a powerful argument of economics. So most ninja you were likely to meet would only be good at one thing, although they'd have some supporting skills in other arts, as being too specialized made them too easy to beat, and there existed counters for every ninja ability. All of them. Martial arts was a must-have area for all ninja, even if only as a supporting skill, because a need for it was far too likely to happen under even the most carefully controlled combat situation. But it didn't have to be a strength for everyone, and as a supporting skill it could afford to lag a little behind your specialty. So there were plenty of with Chunin level martial arts. Of course, level combat skills were unacceptable to a Kage rank ninja, as that was just lagging too far behind where they ought to be. But for a weakness, it still wasn't nearly as bad as being a rookie genin in those skills. So, while disappointing, being stuck this time didn't hurt nearly as much. And one other thing to consider was Naruto had some very good trainers in Clan Kitsune with him now. So he couldn't be entirely denied instruction, as he'd been once before. A bit of decent instruction, and some time to get his body conditioned to the proper degree of fitness, and he'd strike level on those skills easily. So it didn't even seem like a proper block, only a delay. And while joint-level martial arts would not be something a Kage could brag about, if he had sufficient strength in other areas it wouldn't hold him back from getting the rank either. After all, not even Kages could perform every skill at Kage level. No one could perform that perfectly. Besides, that moniker, Midchunin, was a deceptive one. Naruto had eagerly sought out training in every field he could find. So he was a Midchunin in not one style of fighting techniques, but several. By knocking out and impersonating academy students, he'd learned the Konoha Ninja Academy style. Then, by training with Hinata and observing Niji with a stolen Sharingan, they'd followed roughly the same pattern. Hinata was good at the gentle fist, but only about top genin. Then, by copying and practicing Niji's style they about doubled that and acquired roughly the same level of ability as doubling the academy style, Rookie Chunin. Then it was a fairly simple matter to approach her teachers as Hinata, and though they were surprised, astonished, and disgusted more like by her rapid leap in skill, they still went ahead and trained her to the level where they could, and due to those same constraints of body conditioning, that ended up at about the same level as their other martial arts style, Midchunin. Niji actually had more skill than that. The obsessive boy had a grudge against the main family and a need to prove himself, so that he'd driven to where he had at least top-turning ranking in those skills, if not low. So they wouldn't be defeating him in that family's style soon. Actually, the whole family was a touch obsessive about their martial arts training, and all of them averaged a step or so above where their real rank listed them. Hayashi came close to touching Kage rank with his gentle fist skills. From that perspective, it was a little easier to see why they'd always felt Hinata was something of a disappointment. They were wrong. That girl was a shy, gentle soul, and being unwilling to hurt your family didn't make you a failure, quite the opposite really. But well, while the Kitsune weren't willing to forgive the Hyugas for abusing the favorite blue-haired girl, they could at least see where the mistreatment had come from. It didn't make it any easier to live with, however. And each and every one of them had to take her place using shape-shift to receive the instruction they needed to push their martial arts skills in that style from rookie to mid. So they'd all been forced to suffer in her place. And that did not endear the Hyuga clan to most of them. Guy's strong fist style came about originally as something of an accident. When Naruto had first stolen a Sharingan and was playing around with it, he'd unintentionally copied that style from Lee when he fought Sasuke. And to not feel like he betrayed the geniuses of hard work, he'd rather dutifully gone and sought out genuine instruction from the pair of them. That was probably Naruto's weakest style, as it depended so much on having developed the body to extreme levels of performance. So even though he'd done the full regime of learning what he could, and technically knew that kind of fighting to the same level of his others, it actually fought at less than that because he didn't have the muscles to back it up. Of course, with beast mimicry up, he could approach the same fighting level with that as he did with the others under beast mimicry, so the skill was there even if the strength to back it up was not. Guy and Lee could still bat him around like a racquetball, but he wasn't disappointed about that, as the duo was eager to train him up to the same level they were on once these resets were over. And Guy was easily Kage rank based on his fighting technique. So that was something to look forward to. Another martial art that came about almost by accident was finding those scrolls on the Uchiha clan style in Sasuke's hidden stash, and reading them back when he was trying anything he could to improve anything he could and had few enough angles to pursue. He was grasping at anything. They hadn't taught him much, but they had given him a basis for understanding some of what they'd later captured, watching Itachi slaughter Sasuke for becoming a poo wielder and dragging the Uchiha name through the muck. And relentless practice, and a few repeats, one even where they replaced Sasuke in that fight, had refined that further, to where it was almost the equal of the others. Guy had been a surprising help in that department, having fought several Sharingan users back when there was a clan of them, and having learned much of their style simply because he was that good at analyzing the martial arts of his opponents. Going to Kakashi, shape-shifted as Sasuke, and asking for refinement on that style of the art had helped as well, adding what final polish they needed to reach parity with their other fighting styles. Far from being accidental, the Inuzuka clan art was almost thrust upon him. Being Hana's snuggle bunny, and having worked who knows how long in their family kennel, Naruto simply was not permitted to be useless at that clan's fighting art once he'd basically become one of them. Something told him the Mantis clan art would be the same. Similarly with Orochimaru's snake style. Enko knew more than the basics of it, and what she taught them had been refined by watching Orochimaru use it while using a Sharingan on him. Even Enko's skill at that art had skyrocketed. The armed fighting styles, practicing with available weapons and throwing had all followed the same general pattern as his learning the academy style did. So, while in each of those it was possible to categorize Naruto as having mid-chunin levels of skill, calling him a mid-chunin level martial artist was deceptive, as each of those styles focused on separate things, and were more or less useful than others, depending on circumstance. Currently lacking much in the way of sheer, brute force, the gentle fist style was presently among their most effective forms. But take a sword or spear against a gentle fist user and that puts them at a disadvantage, especially if you could fight them remotely, like through a puppet. The very thing that made gentle fist a strength, its ability to disrupt chakra coils, made it a less than ideal form for facing those things without them. Strong fist was practically its polar opposite. Face those guys who used it with a puppet and they'd powder the thing. Nor did they fear weapons, and spent considerable time learning unarmed counters for them. The academy style tried to be decent at everything, neither exceptional nor suffering any serious disadvantages. And the Uchiha style tried to merely be an improvement on that, focused on trying to reach a higher level by using more advanced and difficult moves, mostly because the Uchiha hadn't had to be concerned about how long those took to train normally. The Inuzuka was a direct, straight-line style using hard attacks and blocks, while Orochimaru's snake style was again its opposite, using curving and circular motions, dodging, and only the rare straight-line attacks. One was force and power, and the other deception and speed. Generally speaking, that is. They were ninja, being too predictable was a flaw that could easily get you killed. But nevertheless, they still developed a focus on each art, and an emphasis on what they used, based on their own abilities. And families generally had similar enough traits that strong parents had strong kids, and quick ones passed on the body types to have quick kids. So gradually, almost inevitably, they leaned steadily toward a family emphasis on using the best of their natural traits toward the biggest advantage. To do anything else invited failure, as everyone who opposed you tried to maximize their own strengths, and without the ability to compete you lost. The Kitsune clan style was still under development, but they had plenty of sources to draw from and no end of opportunities for practicing it. They had so much time and resources for development, in fact, that they could ignore some of the usual limitations about working only toward your strengths, as they had almost limitless ability to correct for their weaknesses. Well, everything except strength, that is. That was going to be a real limiter on their developing style until they could actually get better bodies. However, they also had Guy and his prodigy Lee helping them, and if there was anyone more focused on and interested in perfecting fighting arts, they'd never heard of them. Those two kept adding priceless insights into the developing style, and it was looking that, with their help and the endless opportunities to test and practice and refine their art, it was going to be a devastating one. They hoped. Of course, it helped that they had so many people to test it against: Sound Ninja, Sand Ninja, and of course sparring partners from Leaf. And most of those would go to any lengths to defeat them, so if there were flaws, that was the sort of treatment that would expose them as they arose. Of course, it never hurts to have more fuel available to add to the fire. Martial art styles were condensed fighting experience, refined by practice and thorough testing. but having more people's experience to draw from was always a good thing. So, to that end, Naruto sent a number of clones to the Suna Ninja Academy. Being a different village in a different environment, and with different views and so different experiences and techniques, the Suna Academy taught a different style than the one taught in Konoha. Better still, as Tsunade was their Kazekage, she could simply order them to teach him. He didn't have to disguise himself as anyone. Besides, this was truly an awesome opportunity to refine the clan's puppetry skills. The ability to leave shadow clones around meant that Konoha wasn't even aware they were missing the members of Clan Kitsune as they went off and discovered a new life in the village of Suna. In fact, a very familiar scene was taking place at the Kitsune, formerly Uchiha, compound as Hayashi Hyuga led a party consisting of various bigwigs, village elders and the Hokage to go put a curse seal on Hinata's forehead for the rather dubious crime of marrying the boy she loved more than life itself. Once upon a time they'd had to summon Gaara for his support on this. They still liked to. After all, the greater part of the clan adored Gaara. He was just too cute and manipulatable into being a cuddle bear. A few kids' games and the very sincere and heartfelt offer of friendship, and you instantly had one of the most deadly dangerous demon containers in history, as your happy little lapdog. And being rather heavily influenced by the Inuzuka over the years, the clan were also very fond of dogs, lap or otherwise, and especially cute little lapdogs that could become slavering attack beasts on demand. No, his getting all protective of them was one of the most adorable things ever. So they gladly encouraged it. Staring at the hair-trigger psychopath blocking their way into the main house, and the people they were there to speak to arrayed out behind, with clones dotting every rooftop around, the ninja and Hayashi's group realized they were in the beginnings of a battle situation and stopped where they were, spreading out a touch to get fighting room. Catching the first of the ANBU escort to run for cover in a sand coffin, Gaara squashed the man like a grape, spraying his blood all over the visiting party just to make his point before he growled in low tones, "You wanted something?" Seeing that dozens of Naruto clones had spread bags of sand all around the visiting party, none of the others made a rush to take cover. Hayashi Hyuga didn't care, striding boldly forward to the front of his group and declaring, "We are here for my daughter." The man's bloodline was activated. He was no fool, and was ready for combat to spring out from any direction. What he was not prepared for was for the demon brat Uzumaki to make a single, very familiar and very disturbing, hand seal and send out a massive pulse of energy that dropped his branch house escort in nothing flat. Hayashi stared at the boy who dropped the Hyuga branch house members like flies, feeling the very underpinnings of his world fail him in that moment. The brat knew how to control the caged bird seal. The Hyuga were doomed. Those controls were their best kept secret for a reason. And they'd stayed the exclusive property of the main house Hyuga since the caged bird seal was created. While every main house member knew the controls of necessity, they became useless to any who got transferred to the branch house, as those hand seals would ground out in the caged bird seal the former main house member was wearing, inflicting the death or pain intended for another on himself. Not a few former main house members committed suicide that way, unable to bear the enslavement they had endorsed being inflicted on others once it came time for them to share those chains. And no one had ever before had to fear those controls in the hands of a non-Hyuga, as not even the most bitter branch house member would teach them to anyone outside the clan, and get themselves under even more controllers, who might disagree with each other and grant conflicting demands, while the main house were as paranoid as it was possible to be about handing away control of their primary asset, the branch house Hyuga. Having the ability to control the caged bird seal in the hands of anyone but a main house member put the entire clan in sudden, terrible jeopardy. It was a crisis of epic proportions, and Hayashi's stern and stoic expression sank into horrified dismay, melting like wax into an anguished look. The man's eyes grew so round the Hokage wondered how they stayed in his face, and he let an amused thought pass his mind about whether his expression would continue to melt until it dribbled off his face. For Hayashi, it was very much as though he'd been suddenly informed that his always unquestioned power had merely been a joke that had been played on him by others and they were through pretending now. He had been head of the mighty Hyuga clan. Now, the mighty part of that had been dashed to unrecoverable bits, and it was debatable whether he could even be said to be head of his own clan. Was someone else able to order his clan members with as much force as he? It could no longer be said that he was the unquestioned ruler of his own family. He could cite law and precedent, but force was force. Whoever had it could make himself obeyed. He could go crawling to the village council and beg them to tell Uzumaki not to use that power, but it was not the same as an outsider not having it. And Hayashi was not a well-loved man, even by his own clan. Even the remaining main branch elders would look dimly on him for losing so much of their power. The Hyuga had always been powerful for two reasons. One, they possessed a powerful bloodline and a unique fighting style that complemented each other perfectly that made them individually significant. But the second main reason was that they were a large clan. There were quite a number of powerful bloodlines that had only one or two active members. It said great things about the Hyuga's genes that they were able to field dozens of fully trained fighters with fully activated bloodlines. The White Eyes was generous that way, showing up in every member of the clan, with no great scarcity or requirements to activate, very unlike other major lines whose gifts appeared in only a handful out of each generation, or nearly disappearing completely, like the wood techniques, or where a user had to go to great lengths in order to activate it, like the Sharingan. It was so prolific and generous, in fact, that they never had a shortage of users of it. That gave them more influence than one might initially think. A powerful individual was merely a powerful individual. However, having a large mass of powerful people working together transcended anything one lone ninja could do. More people could go on more missions, possess a wider range of skills, and accomplish more things. That was why ninja gathered together in villages, and the basis for the might of their whole entire clan. Having a bloodline present and usable in anyone who was born to a family member gave them a tremendous advantage over those whose gifts showed up in a more limited fashion. In fact, it was so generous the clan had long ago become fanatical about deliberately limiting its spread, lest it spread beyond those they could easily control. But the methods they used to do so were frankly brutal, and made them no friends. The Hyugas were also stupid about that in a major way, in that the method of control they used was to have a handful of clan members enslave the rest, creating bitter, seething resentment inside the family against their rule. And really, it was the clan's numbers that gave them the largest part of their ability to project force, and from that, their precious influence. From the perspective of certain Hyuga, all of them main house members, it resulted in a perfect situation to have near total control over their branch house siblings, as they did not have to fear disobedience or betrayal. They could always count on the branch house as guards or servants, because the least disobedience could be punished instantly with pain or even death. However, that control only worked so long as one hand alone held the leash. The bitter, seething resentment of the branch house didn't matter so much so long as the lid stayed on the pot, so to speak, but any crack in that wall of control could destroy the main house entirely overnight. That crack came when more than one person could give commands that had to be obeyed on pain of death. Should person A say do this and person B say, no, don't, if either one could kill you for disobeying them, you were going to die their way, so you might as well do as you please, like whacking person A for abusing you all of your life. Even the fact that such a quandary could exist could get the branch house thinking dangerous thoughts. Inside the main house, that danger didn't exist. It had been carefully eliminated before the first seals had even been applied by forward-thinking members, who had later been astonished by having the seal applied to themselves so the secrets of its creation would not be spread. The first precaution was that all main house members theoretically had the same goals, so would not give contradictory orders in the first place. The second great precaution was the teeth behind the first, in that the clan had new hand seals that could override the orders of any other main house member, and would quickly slap a caged bird seal on any main house member to press the issue once corrected. So conflicting orders didn't happen among them, and if they did, were quickly put to a stop. However, the clan head's override only extended so far as his chakra control could reach, and that was limited to, practically speaking, his immediate presence. And he could be caught off guard, even so. Witness the dead bodyguards laying around Hayashi's stunned feet at that very moment. Sarutobi was caught between being appalled at the circumstance or amused over the outrageous expressions flitting over the Hyuga head's face as the previously untouchable clan head had to deal with being struck a mortal blow to his authority. Most of the town elders were suffering similar distress, to varying degrees, making for a concert of dumbstruck expressions alternating with horror, disgust, and fear. And Sarutobi considered they had great cause to fear, especially the Hyuga. Having their control method gave Naruto perfect blackmail material. Once Hinata, and who else could it be, had shown him how to control the caged bird seals that enslaved the branch house, they dared not go against him. Because, quite frankly, Naruto was a walking time bomb from that point on, from the Hyuga perspective. What can you do about a boy who can perform one-hand seal, and push out enough chakra to kill all of your clan except 4 old men and 2 tiny girls? Naruto could manage a chakra wave that could cover all of Konoha, plus a good few miles more in every direction, instantly killing, via the caged bird seal, any and all branch house members in that zone, aside from maybe the 1 or 2 that Hayashi could personally protect in that time. Kill him by surprise? That had been tried his entire life. It was nothing new to him, and indeed no attempts had succeeded yet. It's pretty hard to surprise someone who is always facing attempts on his life. On the other hand, Naruto could, in less than a second, take out all of the Hyuga's disposable fighters and more than 95% of their overall strength. Although Sarutobi didn't know this, Naruto had even done it once or twice, just to see the look on Hayashi's face when he realized that he was head of an empty clan. 4 old geezers don't make for much of a breeding pool, and neither does 1 tiny girl. Hinata would naturally not be taking place in any Hyuga breeding program, since she was already taken and quite happily committed to producing kitsune. When producing any children at all became possible, the point behind Naruto's awesome demonstration more often than not. Reducing the Hyuga from the most powerful clan in Konoha to has been remnants of a once great family barely hanging on by their fingernails was worth quite a few laughs in the bargain. But the Hokage was aware that Naruto could, with a single hand seal, create a Hyuga massacre just slightly short of the dread Uchiha massacre, anytime he wanted to. And the Hyuga had created for themselves the tool that gave him that ability to put them in that situation. They had put a chain over their own necks, and now Naruto held the leash. Sarutobi smiled, realizing that they would not be putting a caged bird seal on Hinata this, or indeed any other, day. Not unless Hayashi was willing to sacrifice his entire clan, save for 4 old men and 1 tiny girl, to do it. No. The power of the Hyuga in Konoha had ended. They may not realize it, but they would be obeying the orders of the Uzumaki from now on. They didn't have a choice. Any other course left them reduced to a scattered handful of members, barely worth the name of the clan. Sarutobi suppressed a grin, knowing Hayashi had now effectively enslaved himself and his clan to a boy he'd always vehemently opposed in every venue. Yes, life could deal in sweet ironies indeed sometimes. Using the skills of a thief and burglar obtained acting on a revenge trip long ago, where he had broken into the houses of those merchants who had been cheating him out of his meager orphan allowance by massively overcharging him for the worst quality goods, one of Naruto's clones slipped inside the dwelling place of one of Konoha's ANBU. Yugao had finally tracked down one of the people that had checked out one of those 5 books on chakra control from the collection of teacher resources for the ANBU classes, and he was there to collect it. And frankly, his talents were more than adequate for that challenge. What made the ANBU different from the rest of the ninja of Konoha was not their skill level, although that was supposed to be what it. No, they had just as many incompetents and slackers as the general population, and by and large were not all they should have been. No, the masked ninja were not the undefeatable ghosts they should have been, or were supposed to be. But they did have a resource that was intended to place them there. The ANBU classes were basically the Ninja Academy, only the next step up. There they taught the basics of pressure points, plus stealth and infiltration beyond what the academy touched on. It was also where they gave a ninja his first instruction on the sealing arts, and instructors there demanded a much higher level of combat proficiency than the official Ninja Academy tolerated. Being through the private ANBU Academy should put all of a person's basic skills at about the level of A, once all is said and done. And like the basic Ninja Academy, they taught everything all at once. You could not afford to overly specialize there or they would fail you from the course. One had to practice not only martial arts, sealing or illusions, but all of them at once. It was easier to train a handful of specialists than one generalist, but ANBU were supposed to be the best of the best, able to deal with any situations that came up, and to do that they had to have a broad range of skills. So they taught them basically from where the academy left off up to the next level, in all departments, plus a few new ones. Even most join-ins, once they got accepted into ANBU, learned a great deal about subjects they had never previously touched, ones that were outside of their established specialties. Thus, an ANBU was supposed to be superior to a regular service, an ANBU better than a regular service. There were no ANBU genin, for obvious reasons. Quite a few exceptional genin did get their chance to attend ANBU classes, but if they graduated got promoted automatically. The private ANBU Academy was one of the ways around the regular exams. It was not deemed wise to let every higher-ranked ninja's face be shown in open competitions between villages, and the ANBU were masked for a reason. Aside from the hunter ninja, however, most ANBU never left Konoha. They were the FBI or secret police of the village, meant as their primary mission to keep the rest of the ninja in line. So, unlike the bulk of those ninja who were going out on missions and using all their skills, ANBU generally did not face actual combat with any kind of regularity, and this blunted their skills. In fact, having been peaceful for so long, nor having any significant rebellions among their ranks, the peace inside of Konoha had been going on for a long enough time now that their ANBU had grown quite rusty over that lull. It was that fact more than any other that led to so many deaths among the villagers when the attack came. ANBU were considered to be the primary protectors, the first line of defense, and they'd grown so used to peace that their skills had gotten rusty to the point where more ANBU died than any other class of ninja during the assaults. They met the attacks, as was expected of them, but the skills expected of them had atrophied under disuse so long that they broke instantly under the assaults of the more recently honed ninja from Sun and Sound. They didn't even significantly slow those assaults down, much to their own surprise. Orochimaru had been very well aware Konoha's ANBU were out of practice. That was one of the many factors that convinced him the invasion would succeed. Troops that have been in garrison for a long time have always been prey to those with recent field experience. Peace was poison to an elite military unit. The edge doesn't stay sharp. Like muscles, you use it or you lose it. It was a universal law, like gravity. And training was hard, unpleasant, and boring, so most people eventually slack off on it given a low enough present need. A canny ruler aware of that problem would have enacted aggressive practices of hunting enemy or missing ninja, then rotated all of his ANBU through the hunter ninja branch so they could all get recent field service. But Sarutobi was not a man known for aggressive practices in anything. He saw himself as a man of peace, and peace was good for a great many things, but producing highly advanced killer instincts among veteran troops was not among them. Since he was a military, and not a civilian, leader, letting his troops get out of shape was Sarutobi's fault. New leadership has a tendency to notice such problems and shake things up a bit, clearing out cobwebs. But Sarutobi had been in command for a very long time, letting things slide into a comfortable routine, and Orochimaru was perfectly willing to take advantage of that. His force, made up in large part of recently missing ninja, among the hardest troops with the most recent experience to be found, hit the Konoha ANBU and shattered it like glass when they met. It was like a bunch of parade ground ponies getting suddenly and savagely mauled by vicious trench dogs. It was ugly, brutal, yet effective. Orochimaru had planned his invasion well. His hard-bitten, scarred troops went straight for the jugular of his opponent, while Konoha's ANBU were still waking up from their peaceful, sleepy state of comforting sameness. And it wasn't until the regular service ninja began to help that the battle had swung back in Konoha's favor. Part of that was numbers beginning to tell. Konoha was larger than both Sand and Sound combined, so it could absorb some losses and still fight back hard, but it was also that the regular service leaf ninja had more recent field experience than most of their ANBU, and so were less caught unprepared or off guard by the assault. Although not expecting to be caught up in an attack on their home turf, even they were surprised, and took some time getting up to proper speed. Most of the damage and casualties had come early on in that fight. Naruto had spent a lot of time studying this invasion over and over again, and those were some of the conclusions he'd come to. The guy whose apartment he was breaking into now was not exceptional among their ANBU. He was actually fairly weak for an ANBU, and would die rather messily early on, during the initial rush before even getting his guard up. But the guy had been studying, rather lazily, a few high-rank techniques that he hadn't had the chakra control to pull off. So, he checked out a manual on advanced chakra control techniques from the ANBU library. No, as Naruto's clone was breaking into his apartment to reclaim that book so he could study it, he had to bitterly reflect that some of the merchants he'd stolen from had kept better care to avoid intruders. Then again, people stole from merchants. Who'd be crazy enough to try to steal from an ANBU? Well, everybody, if they knew how poorly this guy protected his place. The only problem Naruto's clone had was finding the book amidst all that stuff. Eventually he located it under a stack of magazines that had a potted plant perched on top, telling him how diligently that had been about studying that manual, and replacing the guy's shampoo with glue and his toothpaste with wasabi, along with another prank or two as a reminder not to be so careless. He fled back out of the window, one sleeping none the wiser. Thanks for watching, Shinobi Squad. If you enjoyed this what if, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your theories in the comments, I'm always reading. Want more Naruto heat? Check out the other videos on the channel. Stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember even shadow clones need love. Peace out, Shinobi.